The real reason the state of Israel has no right to exist is the same reason no government has a right to exist. The Israeli government's crimes may be staggeringly shocking, brutal, and glaringly hypocritical, but they're also a reflection of all governments. Whether it's democratic Israel abusing people, the American Republic killing people domestically and abroad, the Russian oligarchy doing the same, socialist governments, communist governments, monarchies, theocracies, dictatorships, and everything in between, all states in all of human history and today depend on their monopoly on violence or the threat of it to assert, claim, and secure your obedience to their imagined authority and to fund their regimes. Without organized violence or the threat of it and people who believe in its legitimacy, they can't actually force anyone to do anything. And this includes governments that claim to be representative. Regardless of the type of government, corruption and abuse inevitably occur because the state only exists through theft and violence, the perceived right to steal and kill that none of us actually have, not the people the state claims to serve and represent or the people who claim to have authority through the government. If people don't have a moral right to initiate violence, people can't delegate that right to other people claiming to represent them in the form of government. Despite what actual anti-Semites believe, the Israeli government's brutality doesn't occur because it's run by Jews. It occurs because you can't have government without violent authority, which attracts sick people who get off on ruling over and hurting others. This inherent violence allowed communists to kill millions and fascists to slaughter Jews and others deemed a threat. Likewise, Zionist ideology, which is not synonymous with Judaism as a whole, would be toothless without the institution of statism to enforce its objectives. So would any other religious ideology, and belief in government and all its legitimacy, fanaticism, and rituals is a religion in itself where people worship at the altar of violence, authority, and control. Whatever your stance on Israel and Palestine, if you truly oppose violence against innocent people, you must reject the legitimacy of all government, the biggest perpetrator of the worst atrocities in history. There is no mass murderer more prolific than the state, or rather, the people who hallucinated to have legitimate authority and those who believe they're acting righteously with their uniforms, badges, and guns to enact the whims of politicians and government officials who scribble words on paper or make declarations and deem their brutality legal, moral, or both. The vast majority of human relationships are peaceful and voluntary, unlike the inherently non-consensual nature of government. All around the world, every single day, the state aggresses against people while sowing hate, fear, and division. And all around the world, every single day, individual people work together to help each other and make the world go round. And we have so much more in common with each other than we do the ruling class that claims to serve and represent us. In reality, unless you're truly hateful and sick, you probably don't really despise all Palestinians or Arabs or Muslims or Jews or Israelis or anyone else. Those people absolutely do exist and are exponentially more dangerous when given government authority. Regardless, it's more likely that you don't hate any entire demographic, but have simply been taught that the governments and violent organizations acting in their name literally are them. Quote, "We are the government." The truth is that we're all human, and regardless of our faiths or beliefs, we share that humanity, our love for our families and communities, fears for our survival, and hopes for a better present and future. But the only way we're ever going to achieve it is to cast off this belief in violent authority, to believe in ourselves and each other as we recognize our true power, which doesn't come from government elections or bombs or guns. It comes from our ability and choice to break away from our belief in the legitimacy of violent authority and claim our natural-born right to be free.
Woof woof.
Welcome to the Independent Review, a weekly podcast where we bring you the latest from the world of independent journalism. Whether you're a news junkie, a curious learner, or just looking for a fresh perspective away from the corporate media, this is the show for you. So join us now as we dive into the world of independent journalism on the Independent Review.
Welcome to the Independent Review. Today's show includes clips from Kerry Wedler, Craig Pasta, Grand Theft World, Ricky Verandas, the Indie News Network, and James Corbett. Let's jump right into our first clip with Craig Pasta.
Live. All right. Oh shit, I should leave this over here. Make sure we stay live. That's a very bad angle, man. Yeah. Plug it. Yes. All right. Just shoot me. Get me there. How you doing? Craig Pasta, Jardul, everybody. We got the lavaliers working. We got the cameras. Laptop with the phone. Booting in the energy, the intranet, for you guys to check it out. We want to do some live streams this time out. So this is one of the live streams we're going to do. We're here. Fishing for housing right here, guys. Lahaina. Fishing fishing for Lahaina is the hashtag. Go to Lahaina Strong if you want to check out all their stuff. Very important. What's going on? You see all the flags. I got them down here. Got a bunch of tents. Got tents on the other side. Got a kitchen over there. Got the whole 9 yards. A medical tent. Kind of what we saw at the distribution centers where they were setting up and helping out people. This situation is a little bit different. This Lahaina, fishing for Lahaina is all about using a loophole within the law. Ancestry rights say they have the right to fish, and if they're fishing, you can stay overnight. So they're fishing every single day here on the beach, and they're going to stay here until the governor or the mayor, and I don't know if it's an emergency proclamation, but there's this list. I think it's called the Montoya list. I'll get the pronunciation proper again, because everything is registered. You got to register as an Airbnb, I'm assuming. And with some of the tax laws, I talked to somebody who was a bookkeeper, says they tax you for everything out here. So they got to know exactly what you're doing. But they have a list of like 2,400 short-term rentals, Airbnbs for visiting, tourism, that kind of thing. And what these people are trying to say is that we need long-term solutions over here. Staying with the Red Cross in the hotel rooms, we heard from one of the activists over here, one of the local activists, close to 30 groups, by the way, bonding together. They're starting to make gear together, like the H-Town, they call it, which was a Hanakapali distribution center, and Lahaina Strong. They made like a sweatshirt today, and the dude showed me, he's like, we're coming together here. These groups are bonding together because we want to make sure they use their power. This Montoya list that I was just talking about, 2,400 short-term rentals. They want to convert it into long-term rentals because people have been displaced. They can't have a place to live. They have a place to stay. Like we said, when it came to like people staying with the Red Cross, they get a phone call every 2 days. They got to check in. They got an inspection coming to make sure everything's cool with the room. So what they're trying to do is get people some long-term housing. So they set up here on the beach. It's called Fishing for Lahaina, and that is what's going on. They're demanding that the mayor or the governor use his power to give them long-term housing, because a lot of people displaced from the fires. You can see it's one of the fanciest places over here is the Whalers Village. You got the Westin over here. So I think they chose this location for a reason. Until their demands are met, they're going to be here hunkering it down. So we just wanted to bring you live here and show you what's going on. What's up, buddy? People are hanging out, having a good time. The weather's great here in Maui. They just had some food over there that we're cooking. It was a nice long line. It looked really good. Junior was serving up some noodles and some beef. They got a Maui medical tent. Everything's here. So check it out. Lahaina Strong. My man, what's up? Lahaina Strong. Fishing for Lahaina, fishing for housing. See a way you can help them out. The best thing we can do right now, guys, is share this information. This is a brand new channel. Hardly anybody's on it. First time going live, portable and stuff like that. So it's just the beginning. Lahaina on Fire, Volume 2 will be coming out. We'll be explaining what's going on. We've been talking to activists, local businessmen. We got a lot of stuff to show you, man. But this is awesome, guys. All the links are down below if you can find out any way to help. If you got a few extra bucks and you're in a position, we got no corporate sponsors. There ain't no media down here. We were told by somebody the other day, media ain't coming around here. They're trying to keep this quiet. We're going to go meet with Ellie Cochran right now and talk to her. You know, there's less than 100 people. The official numbers are dead. We went up and we counted the crosses. There's 135 crosses with name on it. That's right there. People are still saying this is bullshit. It's a smack in the face. At the very least, some serious negligent stuff went on here. And it's obvious, you know, they have all these emergency proclamations for this and that, giving themselves all powers to control the water, to do this. But there's no emergency proclamations to get an independent investigation. There's no emergency to provide housing for the people who live here. And people have told us, a lot of people just felt beat over the head, man. They're just taking what the government told them. They don't want to cause any problems. And a lot of them have left island. And notice how it said left island. That's how they talk. It's a sad thing, man. I know that everybody's mind right now is still, the majority of it is in Israel, Palestine, because it's really a travesty what's going on over there. But so many things we heard, the negligence, a lot of people did not have to die here. I can tell you that much. And I'm not going to sit here and speculate what caused it, you know, why, motives, but I can tell you this much. Bottom line, a lot of people lost their lives that didn't need to lose their lives. And if those people aren't around, it's easy to grab their land. It's a land grab. So these people are hunkering it down here, man. This is one of the greatest stories, demanding long-term housing. Wow, it's going to be a battle. And it's, somebody said today, man, one of the guys we interviewed, this is just the first inning. It's the bottom of the first, 90 days out, 100 days out, bottom of the first. So we're going to make sure the story doesn't die. We're going to come out here. We're going to continue to report, tell the local story, what they're going through, what they're facing, what they're fighting for. Fishing for Lahaina, fishing for housing. Lahaina Strong, guys. Go to Lahaina Strong. They got an Instagrizzy. They got a couple other pages. Go to Lahaina Strong. Help these people out. We understand there's a lot of other stuff going on. Pasta Jardula, we got to get to the next interview. Thank you so much. Successful. I can see it's still going. Successful live stream. Guys, share it out. It's important. Take a look. They're hunkering it down. I can tell you this much. They are hunkering it down. Let me tell you something. I don't know what's going to happen here. I'm not a fortune teller. I don't got a crystal ball. But I will say this much. If there's anybody, any type of people out there that, hey, man, you mess with the wrong people, it's these people in Hawaii, man. It's these people in Hawaii. They understand the colonization of their island a long time ago, what it means, how the strength they have. If there's any type of people out there that you don't want to mess with, these people right here. So we support them. If you can go to Lahaina Strong, go to Lahaina Strong. Help out in any way, shape, or form you can. We'll see you soon. Volume 2 is coming out. Lahaina on Fire. What's up, man? Lahaina on Fire, Volume 2. Do whatever you can do to help. Share the story, man. The mainstream media ain't talking about this. We have to talk about this. Fishing for Lahaina, fishing for housing. Pasta Jardula, CPJ. Let's do it the CPJ way. Yeah, I just did that. All right, it's 120. We got a rule. Okay, you killed it? I'm going to kill it right now. Sorry, my bad.
Next, we have a great clip from Grand Theft World. Let's take a look.
Is there any history of death cults on this planet? Maybe we should bone up on these people. Skull and bone up on these people.
Right, skull and bones with the ritual in the coffin. You rise from the dead after being, put down for your former beliefs and self and all that sort of stuff. Reborn into your higher self of now a drug dealer, basically a glorified drug dealer.
Well, they say that freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. And when I say they, I mean Rhodes Scholars, because Chris Christopherson, a Rhodes Scholar, wrote that song for Janis Joplin.
What a surprise.
So they're just influencing the culture. There's also people who accuse Chris Christopherson, the Rhodes Scholar, of being a vampire, which is ironic because he was in the movie Blade, where he played a vampire killer. These are not topics to be discussed on this show. I'm just mentioning those things exist out there in reality.
Art imitating life,
just
life
like
imitating art. Who knows?
Here, I got one for you. This section for whoever's editing clips from this show. And if you're in the audience and you want to edit clips from the show, let us know because we need more. All right, so check this out. This is going to be called A Tale of Five Morgenthau's. So we started earlier looking into the origins of the deep state. And then we got turned on to this cat named Hans Morgenthau.
I don't know if he's related. It seems like
we're going to get to it. That's why we got five Morgenthau's. I didn't say they're all related. Four of them are. One's not. This is the one that's not.
He's not, Hans. But he comes from the same area, and he's also a German Jew. So he's of the same ethnic and religious, cultural background. But I don't think he's related to.
Man. Yeah. All right. So this one, he's friends with. He's down with Reinhold Niebuhr, George Kennan. These are all globalist deep state people, by the way. Right?
Hannah Arendt.
International relations, Schmidt. Like this is globalism. This right here, this is globalism. What is that? International relations theory. That he wrote books on this. These are textbooks.
Behind a conceptual thought leader behind understanding what makes up the ideas of international relations.
Oh, Saxe Huber and Goethe. Like they were out to lunch when it was flag designing day.
He's still part of Ashkenazi Jewish family, so he's a part of I believe the Robert Morgenthau's of that ilk, but in the New York sense.
So this dude's got a little Sumner Redstone in him. Sumner Redstone survived that fire back in the day. Morgenthau was one of the passengers on board Swiss Air Flight 316, which crashed while trying to land at Athens International Airport. And then I thought that's how he died. But then it said Morgenthau died the next year. I was like, well, wait a minute. I had to reread. Okay, he was on a plane. It crashed, but he didn't die. All right. So then he dies July 19th, 1980, shortly after being admitted to Lenox Hill Hospital on the east side of Upper East Side of New York City. Okay. Now, you keep reading down. It's all like, okay, all right. I know these people. Francis Boyle. Oh, I know Francis Boyle has written that Morgenthau's post-war writings perhaps contributed to, quote, a break between international political science and international legal studies. Oh, very fascinating. Where did he write that? World Politics and International Law. Because Francis Boyle was featured in this podcast way back at the beginning of this pandemic, because he's the one that said it came from a lab. And here's the papers, right? So that international law professor was one of the first Johnny on the spot people to beat the globalists to the punch.
Yeah,
but wait,
footnote.
There's more. So if you go down to his work in Realism in Politics, Scientific Man versus Power Politics, 1946. So he's at it back in the day. He's writing these books. He's got the positivism. He's getting into deep state. Here's the dual deep state theory. In a 1955 article in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, Morgenthau quoted others speaking about a dual state existing in the United States, the democratic facade of elected politicians who operate according to the law, and a hidden national security hierarchy and shadow government that operates to monitor and control the former. Now, they got, look, George Kennan and Hans Morgenthau. Hold on, dude. Hold the fucking phone. Wait till you see this. Dual state, he wrote that. All right, so I was just checking the references. Now, aside from Skull and Bones guy McGeorge Bundy, right? Let me take you, and Rosto, dude. Yeah, these are dirty birds. Let me go. We're still on Hans Morgenthau.
That's an understatement.
Yeah, I haven't modeled him, so he has no connections. But let me just type in Kennan.
He might be in the Wurlitzer, the Mighty Wurlitzer.
No, this is all going to work out right here, because George Kennan. Let me go. George Kennan.
I don't feel like pulling the book out.
Isn't he the dude who's sitting in Hitler's box at the Olympics in 1936? Doesn't he have a connection? Right? That's him. Isn't that who I'm thinking of?
Indeed.
Kennan and
third generation removed from the Cecil block.
Well, I just wanted to make sure before I went accusing him of something he didn't do. It could be Kennan, and there was no. No, it wasn't McCloy, or maybe it was John J. McCloy. Anyway, these guys are all in on the deep state, the Anglo-American establishment specifically, as well as the other Skull and Bones characters we just mentioned. But George Kennan and all these deep state connections. I mean, here's Kennan. He's under Averill Harriman from Skull and Bones, who helped to fund all that stuff that Sutton wrote about. Like that's right here in this model. So and here's Reinhold Niebuhr, right? So these are not these. So his denial of the deep state, as we investigate this, just keeps looking sillier and sillier. Not trying to embarrass the nice guy from Lincoln Park, but this evidence just seems to like it's unfurling the whole American history right here. If you just pull a little bit on that stuff, and you can see what's going on. Whereas it's very convenient for him to tell you and gaslight you, and say there's no such thing as a deep state, Tony. And the deep state that's existed since the killing of Kennedy definitely isn't something that we need to worry about, right? So that's one of the
definitely not. It's definitely not this here. George F. Kennan, he was one of the group of foreign policy elders known as the Wisemen. So what's the Wisemen? Six friends in the world.
Okay, stop. Hammer time, dude. I have the Wisemen.
Yeah, I mean, you got Dean Acheson, Charles Bullen, Averill Harriman, George F. Kennan, Robert Lovett, John J. McCloy.
Where you at, Wiseman? I got Wiseman. Here's the book.
So bring that up.
I'm knocking stuff down, but you know what? You said there's no deep state.
They helped to craft NATO, the World Bank, and the Marshall Plan.
Okay. Deep state evidence right there. Now, I got a better one, though. Watch this, Tommy. Oh, it's so good it doesn't even have a jacket on the book. Oh, look at this. You know what this is? This is game over. This is like if PBD had a nuke button.
Power Elite. Yeah.
if he had a nuke button on his desk, this is what would have come out, because it's published by Oxford. So this is not conspiracy theory.
Yes, he writes.
It's published.
I remember this years ago.
In the year 1956. So I think the Lincoln Project could have read it by now, right? And what is it all about? It's about the deep state and this non-governmental group of higher circles that have influence over the world. And this is the basic knowledge starting 20 years before I was born. And it's got all the usual suspects that you might say, oh, that's conspiracy theory. Oh, well, these people being involved in. No, this is history, right? So there's like Cecil Rhodes. Oh my goodness, this is in here. This is a book by Oxford about an Oxford guy who has Oxford scholarship, and it's right next to the entry for the Rockefeller family, right? Now this was published, so it's not going to tell you about the Rothschild family and their place in history.
But 1956.
But sure. Carol Quigley will tell you about it in Tragedy and Hope.
Yeah.
Right. So the claim that there's no deep state, it's falling on deaf ears over here. I can't hear you.
Six friends.
I don't know what you're talking about, man. It's like he's in a different version of the Mandela effect. Who was also a guy who was imprisoned by the British
purposely being
they made a movie
ignorant, right? He's purposely manifesting ignorance in his disposition in order to help build a facade of confidence that's literally built on a house of conceptual cards, so to speak, because there's no actual substance behind it. So when someone then challenges him, he probably has a bunch of diversion and misdirection tactics he uses in order to turn it around on the person, and then he does his ad hominem. That's why you have to sort of, with someone like that, like Vinny was saying the right things, but for example, Vinny just didn't reference, the fact of his lack of evidence or the specific, exculpatory evidence associated with a lot of the other videos that have come out. That he didn't reference it well. He didn't reference his own evidence well. He knew what he was sort of alluding to,
true.
But he said it with emotion. And when you say something with emotion, I know. And honestly, Vinny got a lot of praise. If you look at the YouTube comments,
I'm sure
they loved it. They loved it.
I want to invite him on the show. Let's get him as a guest. Now, the dude from Lincoln Park.
He had a pretty nice suit on. You have to give Vinny some credit.
Those dudes are all ballers.
They got to. Yeah.
So the dude from Lincoln Park, Steve, right? He said there's no deep state. He said there's no deep state.
Drop D.
We just showed you. Let me also type in real quick before. Well, just remind me Eleanor Roosevelt, because I'm pretty sure. Is it Eleanor Roosevelt? No, Edith Kermit Roosevelt coined the phrase "the Eastern Establishment," which is the deep state inside of the United States. It's coined by them. They have a phrase. They also call themselves the Georgetown Set. There's a whole bunch of these factions. That are internationalist globalists who are not of any one given religion. So all that gaslighting. So I think he's appropriately ignorant for what he does, because if he learned any of the stuff we're talking about, he would no longer have a career doing what he does out there as the useful tool in their shed.
Quigley had let me see if I can find it. In the beginning of his book, he had a bunch of different breakdowns of the different terminology associated with this establishment. Obviously the Milner Group. I thought the other one was the Georgetown set. I'll see if I can bring it up here.
I'm going to bang through these references while you're looking for that.
Yeah,
here's Henry Morgenthau Sr., okay, Columbia Law School, supporter of Zionism, ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, American Jewish Distribution Committee, the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, the Geneva Conference, Harry Dexter White. So they got these communist spies that work in the Anglo-American establishment that work under Morgenthau. Then you go over here, you've got Henry Morgenthau. Where is Junior?
Here it is.
I have to find Junior, but this is the Harriman connection, right? This is Harriman, Dulles. These are the people that ended up killing Kennedy and standing to gain from all the communist activities. So this is a internationalist, not because of his religion, race, color, or creed, but because of the philosophy and these other people that he's working with in this world federalism effort. Let me go to Morgenthau Jr. now.
So just to reference real quick while you do that. Carol Quigley in the preface to the Anglo-American establishment stated the following. Says, this society has been known at various times as Milner's Kindergarten, as the Round Table Group, as the Rhodes Crowd, as the Times crowd, as the All Souls group, and as the Cliveden set. I was getting it confused. The Georgetown set. It's Cliveden set. So the
there's
Cliveden
Cliveden set. The Cliveden set's the British side. The Georgetown set's the American side. And
that's what I thought. I thought they had a connection, but I couldn't because it's Georgetown, and that's
in
out
the
of
Anglo-American establishment. Or is that what you're in, or are you in?
That's what I'm
Hope?
in. Yeah,
okay.
I'm in Anglo-American establishment. All of these terms are unsatisfactory for one reason or another, and I have chosen to call it the Milner Group. Those persons who have used the other terms or heard them used have not generally been aware that all these various terms refer to the same group. And so that's one of the confusions, historically speaking, when trying to disambiguate these various internationalist groups, is they oftentimes get called different things. They call themselves different, names. And so it can get confused. Yeah. Right. So now, they had your working groups, like you had the Club of Rome, and you had Trilateral Commission, now you had the World Economic Forum, all share a sort of connection with furthering and creating the agendas and policies for national governments in regards to the way in which they want to sort of implement a world order. But there are variations, branches off, parts of this greater sort of philosophical backdrop of this internationalist group.
Well,
that goes back to
the Pilgrim Society is part of that internationalist Anglo-American group,
and that's in America, so it's sort of like bringing it to America, I think, through the Pilgrim Society.
The Warburg family helped to usher in the Federal Reserve System, and the Warburg family was mentored and tutored inside the Rothschild household. They lived together.
Yeah.
It's in Ron Chernow's book on the Warburgs. This is not
and
controversial.
I have the house. Yeah, I have that book actually.
Well, Paul Warburg said you'll have world government whether you like it or not. Take it. Or maybe it was his son, because this is the one from Federal Reserve. So we're still on Henry Morgenthau Jr., right? So he's inherited the social network, and he's down, the next generation. This is a multi-generational thing. Morgenthau Jr., man, he sets up Bretton Woods, the IMF, right? The Morgenthau plan, these sort of things. And by the time you get down to Morgenthau 3, what is this, Tony? The Club of Rome? Something Club of, have you heard of them lately? Now, McCloy is the one that sat in the tiny mustache man's box, right? But he's right next to George F. Kennan. They all work together.
Yeah. McCloy, McKinnon are mentioned the 6 wise men in that,
Right. Exactly.
So. They're both,
and so was Averell
Harriman. 6 wise men that come up. Yeah, and Averell Harriman's on there. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Right. And they could come up with all the internationalist policies. They help with the expansion.
Yes.
They conceive of NATO, and then its role and fulfillment, the containment strategy of the Soviet Union. There's a whole bunch of other.
Now watch. By the time we get down to Robert Morgenthau, the guy that trained
the World
Giuliani.
Bank. The World Bank. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
the World Bank,
exactly.
And the Marshall Plan.
Right. So the IMF, the World Bank, all the people that supported the Nazis and put Hitler in power, they created that shit, and they're still their legacies are in control of that. Here's Robert Morgenthau. Tell me if you notice a pattern here. All up in New York City legal system, right? BCCI, Elliot Spitzer, Cherkasky. Now, when 9/11 happens, Tony, and AIG and Marsh are under investigation, and there's all sorts of stuff, Spitzer goes after them. They bring in Cherkasky. They take him from Kroll. They put him in charge as CEO so that when Spitzer investigates, he's being investigated by the guy who brought him into the fucking DA's office, dude. That is chess on a grand scale.
That was a huge component of who killed John O'Neill. Michael Cherkasky.
What is this U.S. Association for the Club of Rome, though? Because, his connections to the Corsican Mafia and some of this other stuff make me think this Club of Rome might be something we should look up. Let's see. Let's press the browser. The United States Association of the Club of Rome. Tell me if you've heard this one before. This is a website dedicated to sharing the media links for this. So what is their relationship to the Club of Rome? Do they say anywhere on here?
There's a USA course sites.
Videos of their meetings. Let's watch some of this stuff, dude. Here we go. From catastrophe to well-being. So they're talking about the pandemic. Interesting that the people that made the World Economic Forum and you shall eat the bugs and own nothing, right? I mean, this is their whole media channel. That's pretty cool. Let's go see. Maybe we should follow them on the YouTube. There it is. U.S. Association of the Club.
15 views.
Oh, dude, they got 0 likes, man. How many? They got 279. 279 subscribers.
Yeah.
These are the people trying to take over our planet.
Well, they're publishing it for themselves.
So
more than anything. For people unfamiliar, just to give some context to the Georgetown set, the group comprised 2 lawyers, 2 bankers, and 2 diplomats. I mentioned Dean Acheson, Charles Bullen, Averill Harriman, George Kennan,
Chip
Robert
Bullen.
Lovett, and John McCloy.
Okay, so
Bullen.
Lovett
the 5
was a Skull and Bones guy, and he's in on the assassination of James Forrestal. So let me just tell you, do I have Wiseman in here?
Yeah, that's right.
Wiseman by Walter Isaacson. Here it is, dude.
5 of the 6 were from the so-called Georgetown set. Acheson, Harriman, and Lovett had known each other since their days of prep school or college and on Wall Street.
This is all the Anglo-American establishment. This is the British infiltration of the American intelligence community. This is globalism. Here's Georgetown set. Here's McCloy. Here's the Rhodes Scholars. Here's Kennan, Acheson, Chip Bullen, and the CFR, right? If you needed more, you got Clark Clifford. He made the National Security Act, which created the CIA, but he was also involved with BCCI money laundering that we just saw Morgenthau presiding over, right? So if you just learn, a couple more dots, if you have a couple more pieces of general grammar, then you no longer see it as incompetence and these people were well-meaning. There's a fucking organized plan, and they've been writing about it for a long time. And it's a little bit frustrating that guy from Lincoln Park goes out there misinforming millions and millions and millions and millions of people, right? We saw at the beginning of the show, I had 1 retweet and 3 likes on my tweet. If I'm misinforming people, first off, it's genuinely, I'm not doing it on purpose. It's by accident. And I'm not getting distribution for my malinformation, misinformation, disinformation, whatever the fuck you want to say, because you haven't read a book and you intellectually fart out of your mouth instead of having something intellectually cognitive, enriching to share with us.
What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come on.
Our next clip is a great segment from the Indie News Network.
Who are these people?
So this is from Mint Press. Big fans of them over here. Jessica Buxbaum from Mint Press does some pretty good work on this. The reality of Gaza's forced exodus, unveiling Israel's secret plan. Boo, boo, boo. The fucking secret plan, Colin. Turns out not so secret either, but it's been a plan for a minute. So last weekend, Israeli newspaper Local Call leaked an official Israeli government document recommending what Palestinians have been saying Israel is already trying to execute with its war on Gaza. The forcible transfer of Gaza's 2.3 million Palestinian population to Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. We've been talking about this all night. Sinai, yeah. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office acknowledged the intelligence ministry's proposal's exit. Still, it dismissed it in a statement to the Times of Israel as a concept paper, the likes of which are prepared at all levels of the government and security agencies. So immediate backpedal. Immediate. Yep. Just hit that little backpedal, fucking little crossfade goes for the 3. So, yet Israel's actions, circulating information, and international support all signal that this policy on paper is quickly transitioning to the policy on the ground. This reminds me of the talks about, and I forget who it was, and someone will let me know in the chat, but talking to an American general where he hands him a paper and like goes, this is what we're doing in Iraq and Afghanistan and whatever. It has nothing to do with 9/11. We're just going to invade these 7 countries. And he then whistle blew on that, and everyone was like, no, that's not what's going to happen. Turns out exactly what happened. That's what this sounds like. So the document dated October 13th calls for Israel to evacuate the Gazan civilian population to Sinai, first by establishing tent cities and then building new towns in northern Sinai. Following the resettlement, the paper recommends to create a sterile zone of several kilometers inside Egypt and not allow the population to return to activity or residence near the Israeli border. Wesley Clark is what Desert Mantis saying. That's who whistle blew on that thing I talked about earlier. What does that sound like, Colin? We've seen some things in history very related to that.
Right, but what I was thinking immediately, this gives precedence to what Daniela Weiss was saying in our previous.
Yes. Yep.
You know.
Yep. Like, send them over to Egypt and Sinai
and what will keep Netanyahu in power? If people like her are making the demand that we want them out, we want them into Egypt so we can essentially take that over too, you know, Bibi is going to go for it if he wants to maintain his position. So it just kind of shows.
Yeah, it's like
that's why they're voted in, even though their politics, I think, are
it's
disastrous.
Like the evangelical vote of Israel is causing this,
right,
over and over again. That is, if they have a democracy that works at all, you know, which we know they don't, because when they put in one of his competitors, it was the same. Wait, I gotta go back. So Netanyahu's already attempting to put this plan into action. Last week, the Israeli prime minister sought to convince European leaders to pressure Egypt into accepting refugees from Gaza. You're already seeing that all over the place now, right? Well, why won't all these other places accept them? Right? That's what you're hearing. This is that. Okay, so according to the Financial Times, diplomats from France, Germany, and the UK, however, dismissed the idea, citing Egypt's strong rejection of the displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. While that avenue failing, Netanyahu is now reportedly proposing to write off a large chunk of Egypt's debt through the World Bank.
Oh, God.
Yeah. World Bank. Everyone's favorite BRICS alternative. So, yeah. To incentivize the country to take in Gaza's population. Now, we've talked about this a bit, at least with Indy, I think I've talked about this, where it's like, it's, what is that called, Care Bear, when you send people and, like, have money attached, right? You are literally giving them money in the tune of, like, debt cancellation. What's that called? So, like, you could literally do the math, right? Which I'm sure we'll get to. That's called, for the kids playing at home, slavery. That's what that's called. Okay? You're just, like, here, accept some of our refugees for fucking money. Right. So, anyway, everything that has been spelled out in this document in terms of the modalities is everything that we're seeing right now. International human rights lawyer Diana Boutou told Mint Press News. The plan's first phase details Israel's aerial bombardment of the northern section of the Gaza Strip and the moving of the population of over 1 million people to the south. The second stage outlines Israel's ground invasion beginning in the north and then taking over the whole region. Okay? So exactly what's been happening?
Right.
Compressing,
definitely in play right now.
Yeah. Compressing Palestinians to smaller and smaller areas may just be the first of what will ultimately be the fulfillment of these plans on paper. Adam Shapiro. We've heard this Shapiro name come up frequently here of late.
I mean, it's not, hopefully not related.
Fucking P word. But, you know, I don't know if there's a relation, Ben, but maybe, I don't know. So you don't call anymore. The controversial intelligence ministry document isn't the only police paper recommending 2.3 million Gazans forcible transfer to Egypt. Colin, what is that called? We've talked about this before. What is that forcible transfer to Egypt? Like, called a war crime? That right there, that's called forcible deportation. That's a war crime, just a war crime. There's one among many being committed in this region right now. Israel security think tank Mizgiv, Mizgav, I would imagine, for the Institute for National Security and Zionist Strategy. Okay. Published a paper written by Mizgav researcher Amir Whiteman on October 17th entitled A Plan for Resettlement and Final Rehabilitation in Egypt of the Entire Population of Gaza. Economic aspects. Whitman is an activist with Netanyahu's Likud party and reportedly a close associate of Intelligence Minister Gila Gamliel. The report calls for Israel to transfer as many Gazans as possible to other countries. Any other alternative, including PA rule, is a strategic failure. Therefore, Gaza's population should be transferred to the Sinai Desert and the displaced absorbed in other countries. Mizgav published a paper on X, formerly known as Twitter. That's because it is Twitter. Along with a tweet outlining the paper's central arguments. The post was deleted following widespread backlash. The original tweet, rascally wabbits. The tweet read, "There is currently a unique and rare opportunity to evacuate the entire Gaza Strip in coordination with the Egyptian government. An immediate, realistic, and sustainable plan for the resettlement and humanitarian rehabilitation of the entire Arab population in the Gaza Strip is required which aligns well with the economic and geopolitical interests of Israel, Egypt, the United States, and guess who, Care Bear? Saudi Arabia.
Saudi.
Yeah. In 2017, it was reported that there are about 10 million vacant housing units in Egypt, of which about half are built and half are under construction. For example, in the two largest satellite cities of Cairo, there's a huge amount of built and empty apartments owned by the government and private parties, and construction areas sufficient to house about 6 million inhabitants. Colin, how many you think are in Cairo houseless right now? If you were to take a guess.
Oh God, I would say 2 million.
But you know what you don't get for housing them? Your debt's paid off.
Right.
Okay. So the average cost of a 3-room apartment with an area of 95 square meters for an average Gazan family consisting of 5.14 people in one of the two cities indicated above is $19,000, Care Bear. That's it. $19,000 for a family of how many? You want to round that up? Yeah. 5 people. You know, taking into account the currently known size of the entire population living in the Gaza Strip, which ranges from about 1.4 to approximately 2.2 million people, one can estimate that the total amount required and be transferred to Egypt to finance the project will be on the order of $5 to $8 billion. Injecting an immediate stimulus of such size into the Egyptian economy would provide a tremendous and immediate benefit to al-Sisi's regime. These sums, in retaliation to the Israel economy, are minimal. Investing a few $1 billion, even if it's 20 or 30 billion, to solve this difficult issue is an innovative, cheap, and sustainable solution. Okay? There's no doubt that in order for this plan to be realized, many conditions must exist concurrently. Currently, these conditions are optimal, and it is unclear when another such opportunity will arise, if ever. Misgov subsequently published another paper related to Gaza entitled Hamas Enjoys Widespread Support Among Gaza's Population, written by Misgov fellow Yishai Armani on October 19th. Okay, in this essay, Armani details the considerable support Hamas enjoys from its constituents, writing, despite claims now being made that the majority of the public in Gaza desires peace and is being held captive by Hamas, data and evidence collected over the past 2 decades consistently demonstrates the opposite. Hamas enjoys widespread support among Gaza's civilian population. The paper then concludes that claims regarding the existence of a clear ideological or political demarcation between the majority of Gaza residents and Hamas are entirely unfounded. Sure they are, guy. While Armani makes clear not to conflate civilians with Hamas militants, he does note that Hamas's popularity among Gaza's residents should be taken into account with regard to decisions related to the military campaign and to post-war arrangements in the Gaza Strip. The Misgov Institute did not respond to Mint Press News' request for comment on these position papers. Israel legal advisor Itlay Epstein explained on social media how the views outlined in Misgov's recent documents are already translating into action. According to leaflets airdropped on northern Gaza from the Israel military, anyone who doesn't leave for the south could be considered affiliated with Hamas. Furthermore, yes. Yep. Exactly. Everyone is Hamas. Don't worry about it. Furthermore, Misgov's executives already appear integral in crafting government legislation. Misgov is headed by former Netanyahu National Security Advisor Meir Ben Shabbat, an influential figure in the Israeli security sphere and one of the architects of Israel's normalization deals with the UAE Bahrain, and Morocco. Misgiv is also funded by the Kohelet Policy Forum, now notorious for being behind the current Israeli government's judicial overhaul plans. The Institute's founder and former chairs are also entwined with the Israeli government. Former chairman Yoaz Hendel served as Israel's Minister of Communications. Moshe Alon served as defense minister under Netanyahu. Moshe Aarons also worked as Israel's defense minister and foreign affairs minister. Natan Sharansky served as interior minister and as deputy prime minister. One of the critical points in the intelligence ministry's document stressed the need for harnessing international support for the expulsion plan, something analysts argue Israel's Western allies are already doing. Care Bear. Yeah. On October 20th, the White House sent a $14 billion funding request to Congress for aid to Israel, Gaza, and Ukraine. The letter's language has come under scrutiny for suggesting the forcible displacement of Gazans to other countries. Oh, y'all didn't know that shit was in there, huh? Y'all didn't know about that shit. This is why. Okay?
What did the letter say?
These resources would support displaced and conflict-affected civilians, including Palestinian refugees in Gaza and the West Bank, and to address potential needs of Gazans fleeing to neighboring countries.
Wait, pause.
Yes.
Pause.
Yeah.
Pause.
Yeah.
No, this gives the idea that
remember that Band-Aid?
Leaving on their own accord.
Yes. Remember that Band-Aid? The Band-Aid that they put, remember that, like, oh, we can beat your wife, but, like, we'll put a Band-Aid on it and give her some bottled water for, like, that's,
yeah.
Like, that was this. This was the Band-Aid that they got, but guess what it's tied to, Care Bear? Guess what that aid is tied to? So for you to get the aid, that means you got to do what?
You got to go.
You got to fucking go. Like, so either get the fuck out or die.
Right.
That's what this is.
I'm sorry, this has to be clipped. Honestly, like this should be clipped. This should be all over Twitter. Honest.
Yeah.
Because like this just gives more proof. Like this humanitarian aid
is
that what we're hearing on mainstream is bullshit.
Is fucking bullshit.
It's always the devil. I say it all the time. The devil's
in the fucking details, ain't it? Ain't it fucking in there? Yep.
well, it's worse than what we thought because it's the idea of like, oh, they get the aid, but they will continue to bomb. No, it's like
Mastermind Hour. First, you get the aid,
and they will bomb your ass anyway. But you got to leave anyhow.
Mastermind Hour. First, you get the aid. Then you get the power, and then you get the women. In other words, Colin, cash rules everything around me. Gotta get the money. Dollar bill, y'all. Like, that's literally like they're trying to make him an offer they can't refuse. Like,
well, honestly, like this article, I think that was Crab saying secret plan. This isn't a secret. Like,
yes, but it's
especially if you've been watching. This might be secret to the normies, but like for us who's been kind of watching this, we knew that this kind of shit was going to happen in some way, shape, or form. But I didn't realize how blatant this actually was in terms of, this is kind of this. I think if anything, this is kind of showing that like what we've been thinking is happening a lot sooner than anticipated. I figured they will just kind of continue blowing shit up for an indeterminate amount of time. No, it's like, get out now. Yep. Like, and go to Egypt.
Yep. Someone said that
we'll bomb you there too.
Ben Sharpie only Twitter account got me suspended, and that hell site. He's Mossad. Colin, do you know what Mossad is? Mossad is a Hebrew word. Okay. And we asked them what it meant. Like, could you give us a translation? Right? Do you know what they called it? The Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. Spell that out for me, please. If that's like,
Israeli...
your... Yeah. Secret.
Wait, say the words again. Secret.
Intelligence.
Oh.
Service.
Oh.
Otherwise known as...
ISIS.
Yes. Yeah, kind of a little bit. Maybe that's why they tried to call it ISIL for a bit. They didn't want it confused. But just saying. I mean, I'm not saying it's a coinky dink, but it is kind of coinky dinky, isn't it? So Don slammed the White House's request language and called on Congress to reject the supplementary funding bill. Okay, but we know how that worked.
Right.
The Biden administration isn't just giving a green light for ethnic cleansing, it's bankrolling it. Sarah Lee Winston, Dawn's executive director, said in a statement, gaslighting Americans into facilitating long-held Israeli plans to depopulate Gaza under the cover of humanitarian aid is a cruel and grotesque hoax. While the White House requests to acknowledge the possibility of Gazans being expelled during the war, U.S. President Joseph Biden had previously advocated against this forcible displacement. The White House did not respond.
Whatever. He's pussy popped and backtracks on every single thing that he said. So,
yep.
So whatever.
The White House did not respond to Mint Press's news inquiries for comment on the aid bill. Mint Press, when the fuck White House respond to any of your questions, let alone this one in particular? I feel you, but I feel I'm I know why you're doing that. That's they ain't saying shit. I know they ain't saying shit. They never say shit. The Americans are supporting Israel and creating the conditions on the ground that are catastrophic from a humanitarian perspective, Don Shapiro told Mint Press News. So far, the U.S. has repeatedly rejected calls for a ceasefire in Israel's war on Gaza. However, Biden recently advocated for a pause to secure the release of American captives held by Hamas. The U.S. has also sent senior army officials to advise Israel's military on its ground invasion into Gaza and increased its arms and troops in the Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean regions. This has included shipments of armored jeeps and advanced weaponry to Israel. Footage circulating online has also shown U.S. manufactured weapons containing white phosphorus being used in Israel's assault on Gaza. These artillery shells were made by Pine Bluff Arsenal. Feel free to put that into Google Maps. A chemical weapons manufacturer based in Arkansas, known for supplying white phosphorus ammunition. Guess whose neck of the wood that is, Care Bear? Arkansas. Who you know from Arkansas?
I have no idea.
They've been in power a few times.
Oh, the Clintons, whatever.
Yeah. You think they've made any money on Pine Bluff, you think?
Oh, of course they have.
Okay, probably connected to the Waldens, who are also there. So, the majority of the world is opposed to this attack on Gaza, Bhuttu said, but still Western Europe, the United States, and Canada are not. Bhuttu described the U.S. as totally complicit in Israel's displacement of Palestinians in Gaza, saying, this is an Israeli plan that will be signed off on by the Americans, by the Canadians, by Europe, and so on. Israel's policy papers promoting the ethnic cleansing of Gaza simply mirror what many Israeli politicians and media pundits have expressed since the beginning of the war. Member of Israeli parliament Ariel Kalner called for repeating the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians during Israel's establishment as a state in 1948 known otherwise as the Nakba, or catastrophe in Arabic, except on a much larger scale. You know, I don't know, there's another Jewish word about breaking glass, you know, might be similar. Right now, one goal, Nakba. A Nakba that will overshadow the Nakba of 1948, Kalner wrote on Twitter. Dror Edyar, Israel's former ambassador to Italy, called for the complete destruction of Gaza during a live interview with Italian channel Reti 4. Quattro. For us, there is a purpose to destroy Gaza, to destroy the absolute evil, he said. Absolute evil. Mastermind hour Kristallnacht. That would be the German word, I think. But, you know, German Jewish, same diff, right? At least the Nacht part is. As Israel continues carpet bombing Gaza, and as even a sliver of humanitarian aid struggles to trickle into the besieged enclave, another Nakba, or arguably just another chapter in this genocidal series, is rapidly being carried out. So this has just been a continuation since 48, Bhutto said. It's just a slow drip to get people to leave, and in some cases, not a slow drip, but even a faster one. So, yeah, you just sent me a thing?
Yeah, just what you mentioned several paragraphs ago reminded me of this. This was, I know a couple of other like outlets kind of reported on this back in September, but I know Brett Wilkins, a friend to the show, wrote an article regarding Benjamin. I have to find where he was. At the UN General Assembly. This was back in September.
Yeah.
Netanyahu showed this map, which he called the New Middle East.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds about right. That's like the Euphrates over to the Nile.
Right. Well, right. So basically in that map, we see Israel fully filled in.
Yeah.
So West Bank gone, East Jerusalem gone, Gaza gone.
Yeah.
But then like
all that area in green is from the Euphrates to the Nile. Probably further than.
Yes.
Because if that's Egypt, so the Nile's in the middle of that. So you know.
So that big sliver of that river in between Saudi Arabia and Egypt.
Yeah, that little sea.
Yeah.
No,
that's
Yeah, no, this is like this bit. This isn't a river. That's like
it's instant within.
Yeah,
Egypt,
it's like in here. It's like from here down.
My geography is bad right now, but
no,
but the idea is that just to eliminate Palestine, but developing relations with all of these countries in the Middle East, which is again where Egypt comes to play in like what you.
Yeah.
So you know, obviously pay off their debt.
Mm-hmm.
If you take our slaves,
right?
Essentially,
yes.
So,
well, I mean, it's like do what you want with these people. Here's money. Like we're gonna force march them to you,
right?
So, yeah. Meanwhile, Egyptians who desperately need their own aid and care are going to be ignored.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And then Israel will then start blaming Egypt for retaliation against it. And then they'll go after it.
Find a reason to go after it. And yeah.
and then we'll support it with military aid, and then it'll be the Saudis next, and then this is invasion. But yeah. Well, on that note,
so we definitely need to have a lighter show next week.
We'll try. Even then, it might be a bit like depressing. Sorries. This is like the world. My apologies. If I could fix, I would.
You're going to depress the people the day before Thanksgiving.
It's okay. They'll get boats. It'll be fine. We'll figure it out. But
well, speaking of, so that's our show. So let's look.
Next we have a clip from Ricky Verandas and his interview with Craig Pasta.
Hopefully maybe we get to see each other in Thanksgiving in my old stomping grounds, Boca Raton, and not too far from the Duck. I used to ride by the Duck almost every day for about 4 years straight when I was going to Lutheran school. I think it was around 4 years straight, because I went to Lutheran school because there was no open availability in the Catholic school my mom wanted me to go to. And in between that, I went to some public school as well, because I lived in this one area called Dog Patch, and that's where the Duck is located, in the heart of Dog Patch. Now, Dog Patch is not the name that was given to it by the developers. It's just this one stretch of area that kind of goes for about a quarter of a mile from Yamato Road on Federal Highway on the west side of the highway. Dog Patch is not part of the east side of the highway. It's just the west part of the highway, and it's just lower income houses that are there. And it's in between a Federal Highway and Dixie Highway, which are the two little roads. Dixie Highway is 1 lane each way at this point over there. Federal Highway is 2 lanes at each point there. It's a bunch of commercial real estate, commercial places, restaurants, that not. But the Dog Patch is where I used to bike through every single day to get to the bus stop over at Advent Lutheran. There's also the train tracks over there. And I used to pass your family's establishment on a regular basis, the Duck. And now they've redone it, and it's nice, and it's cool, and it's awesome. And hopefully we'll get to spend some time over there. But Boca Raton, Florida, where I'm from, where I moved from New York in 1979, the end of 79, like December of 79, I think is when we first officially started moving there. It was after a hurricane, several months after Hurricane David, I believe it was. But that's when I moved to Boca Raton. And if anybody's been to Boca Raton is a pretty wealthy area. It has some middle income, houses and areas too as well. Very big. The city district is one size. It's Boca Raton has its own police department, but it has mostly the area of Boca Raton. When you go west of Military Trail, is a county sheriff's over there. So it's a huge area. Boca Raton has a lot of rich areas, a lot of middle income, but it's predominantly Jewish, right? And I've grown up with a lot of mentors, friends of mine, Jewish girls I've dated, or, just friends of mine who are Jewish and their fathers who are pretty much pro-Zionist. And they were just great people to me growing up, gave me a lot of insight what's going on. My mother, an Italian woman, she used to make the joke. She's like, marry a Jewish girl. Why? Her father will tell you how to make money. You know what I'm saying? And that was one of the jokes over there back growing up, but it was kind of true. My school in Spanish River High School, when I went there my freshman year, they tried to have classes during the Jewish holidays, and it was almost like a ghost town. So for my sophomore year on, they'd stop scheduling school during the Jewish holidays. That's how predominantly Jewish my area was, and Boca Raton was. So I had a lot of that influence growing up. And there's some things they really, things that I can remember. My friend Alyssa Coleman, her father, telling me when I got out of the Navy and I went back home to Boca Raton, he would say, you're going to be successful whatever you do. You got a great heart. You got a great personality. You're the world's greatest mensch, which was one of my favorite nicknames because it meant so much that you're just a good guy. So when you decide to do something, you're going to catch hard, and you're going to do that. Another friend of mine's father, who I met outside of Boca Raton, but he was a Jewish guy, a Zionist guy, he would tell me, don't brag about yourself. Don't ever brag about yourself. You're only a hot shit when other people brag about you. And it really changed my whole mentality and how I look at things and made me more humble. So I've had, situations throughout my whole life. And even before that, I'm saying, as a young kid, great advice from actual Zionists in Boca Raton. But, it doesn't take a lot of research to understand what's going on over there. There's an actual concentration camp inside the country of Israel. In 1948, during the Nakba, Palestinians were forced off their land by bayonet and whatnot. It wasn't Hamas they were throwing off the land. It was Palestinians. That's why when you understand the history of what's going on today, you understand that, the state of Israel, the Zionist movement, is not having beef with Hamas. They use Hamas as the excuse. Their beef is with the Palestinians. They want that land. They believe that land belongs to them. And they use Christians, and say the Bible, is the reason why they have a right to those lands and whatnot. So, I would be silent about when it came to what was going on in Israel for many years because I didn't want to upset, people who were close to me. My mom still lives there. I'm going back to Boca Raton for the holidays, for Thanksgiving. I'm making the antipasta. That's what I took the responsibility. So I will have the antipasta will be served at noon when the Detroit Lions kick off on Thanksgiving. That's going to be my responsibility this year. Everybody's taking a little bit something, and I think they're catering in the turkey. It's Boca Raton. But when I go back home, people who have now, that I've stepped up to Jimmy Dore, and there's people watching me that have never watched me before, people in my mom's community, they're going to probably be upset with me, and upset at my positions right now, maybe kind of calling me anti-Semitic. So there's so many things that are going on right now in politics that are deeply bedded in my youth, in my upbringing. I didn't look at these people as bad people. I didn't look at these people as murderers and killers and occupiers, and I still don't. So it's very complicated to me, and I spent many years making sure I avoided the subject because of my personal life, and also because as well as I do, Ricky, it's not financially advantageous to talk shit against the Israeli lobbyist. And when you do so, that's the way you find yourself getting demonetized, slapped down, and whatnot. So I avoided this conversation. But guess what? Right now, what we have been playing out in front of us is unprecedented. It's an ethnic cleansing and a genocide taking place in front of our very own eyes. We no longer can be silent about what's going on. And a lot of people, it's kind of interesting because there's a lot of people I met on your show, and a lot of people I met through Rebel for a Cause that Courtney did and that kind of community, which the populist right is there. They've shown their true colors, and they've almost mimicked what they used to hate. The anti-speech, the censorship left, the victim left. They're doing everything that they claim to hate right now. You know what I'm saying? And I'm really tipping my hat off to those out there who are speaking out there, who are not holding grudges against me. Mel K contacted me the other day. I haven't had a conversation with her since October 7th. I'm wondering how that's going to go. You know what I'm saying? I think she's really fair and balanced. Matt Baker, who I met at Rebels for a Cause, despite his group being so pro-Israeli, the pro-Israeli right. And it's funny because I wrote down 4 answers. I wrote down the 4 main reasons why the pro-Israel right stands by the Zionist nation. And I have a lot of compliments and love and support and solidarity for those who on the right are speaking up against the team sports mentality and what everybody's doing. I told a lot of the doctors, I told one doctor in particular, I'm not going to tell which one doctor because I don't want to talk about personal conversations or at least, say who it is. But I said, listen, it was very easy for me, even as a leftist, to understand what was going on during the COVID protocols and not stand by what the big pharma companies were trying to do with the government and this fourth industrial revolution, new, greater reset mentality, because you had all the receipts. You had all the receipts when it came to natural immunity. You had all the receipts on the history of what the pharmaceutical companies try to do when they try to force in the drugs, like they did with the AZT during the AIDS situation. Now they're trying to do with remdesivir. You had all the receipts when it came to the actual mRNA. On your show, Ricky, you did an amazing job getting all these doctors on before anybody else. And the thing about it is, the receipts are there. Well, guess what happens with the Israel-Palestine situation? A lot of the doctors that are going along with this too as well and playing the team sports mentality, we have the receipts. Specifically, my clan. The Max Blumenthals and the Dan Cohens and the Vanessa Beeleys and the Eva Bartletts, the Cynthia McKinney's. These are all people I've been close with. This is the group I was part of. We would call the anti-imperialist left. You know what I'm saying? We have all the receipts here on this one. So you can either get with it or you can stand behind your tribal mentality. And that's the thing, Ricky. It's not a tribal mentality to cheer on your team like Laura Loomer's doing. It's you're afraid to speak out against your audience that you know will be mad at you when you tell the truth. That's one of the biggest reasons why this pro-Israel right stands up with the Zionist nation. They're afraid to tell their audience the truth or speak the truth, so they go along with it. And then they also play the victim mentality right now. Jewish people, anti-Semitism around the country is awful and stuff. It's like, dude, nobody walking down the street in the United States is a white guy walking down the streets and they go, Ricky, I wonder if he's Jewish. Like, come on. This is bullshit right now. Stop with your victim mentality. It's the same thing you accuse the left of doing. You're doing yourself. And then the third reason, get over your American empire mentality of what you've been taught in school. We all came along. Seth Rogen said this on Mark Maron's show the other day. We were lied to as Jews growing up in Hebrew school. They were like 1948, like, come move here. The doors are open. No, people were forced off their land with violence. You know what I'm saying? And those are the three reasons. And the fourth reason is, the easy one. People are paid to do this shit. So, but it's crazy, actually, what's going on today and my upbringing. And to go back to Boca Raton, maybe we'll get to see each other and have some conversations. There are people who have unfollowed me on Facebook that were friends of mine in elementary school that won't follow me now because of my stances on Israel-Palestine. So it's happening now. It's happening today. And yeah, that's a little bit of the history of what's connecting, what's going on right now. So
yeah, it's amazing.
Sorry if I talk too much.
No, it's all right. I mean, usually in the comments, I'll hear that I talk too much. So it's good when I have a guest that takes the lead. But yeah, it's amazing how neither side, the left or the right, and there should be more than two, but I mean, just the majority of people kind of fit in, those boxes, and even though they shouldn't, like I said, but the people like you and myself that, who consider ourselves kind of politically homeless is because we don't fit in those boxes, and we're logically consistent and we're intellectually honest. And the thing is, a lot of Scott Horton, I'm a huge fan of Scott Horton. He was a regular on my show for a long time. We disagreed on COVID. I was stunned that a libertarian who is anti-military industrial complex could not see what was going on with COVID. And then you see the reverse happen, right? Like you see now, like all the people that were anti-big pharma and anti-GMOs and anti-Monsanto all of a sudden, couldn't see that they were being tricked into believing that for once in human history, big pharma cared about our well-being. And, so to me, it's frustrating because it's like, oh, now you're being really outspoken in regards to like being anti-war, but you were really quiet during the COVID thing, and vice versa. Like I said, there's people who were really outspoken during COVID who are now kind of quiet because this is a controversial topic in their view that they don't want to dip their toes in. And it just, to me, it's frustrating because regardless how controversial the topic is, regardless which tribe is standing on which part, which side of the discussion, you should be intellectually honest and you should say what you truly believe is right and correct, and also come to the conclusion that these are very complex issues. These are, you can find, I've seen so many debates in this Hamas Israel thing, and it's mind-boggling, like how neither side will admit when the other side makes a valid point. And there's both sides make valid points. Like you will see, like I'm a big fan. I grew up listening to Low Key, and he was a rapper from England. He's a Middle Eastern rapper who's a English.
Mint Press.
What's that?
He works for Mint Press now, right?
Does he? Oh, maybe he does. Maybe. Yeah.
I think he does. Yeah.
And he's, but I grew up listening to him. He had a very Palestinian perspective on things, and and even low-key sometimes I can see somebody make a valid point. He recently was on Piers Morgan, and I'm not a huge fan of Piers Morgan by any stretch of imagination, but there was, when he did make a point, low-key would kind of dismiss it. But I've seen Piers Morgan do the same thing. When low-key would made a valid point, he would dismiss it. And it's like, why don't we just admit that these are complex issues? Maybe things aren't as easy as just seeing everything in black and white. And maybe there isn't always a good guy and bad guy. Maybe there's a mix of the two. And you can go through history. Yeah, there's absolutely examples of, Hamas doing terrorist attacks, and you have to admit that was a terrorist attack. But you also can entertain the idea that it seems like it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that Israel, with just how how good they are at intel, how for them not to foresee it happening, and then you do have to maybe.
Well, let me make some comments on that, because this is where we differ a little bit. Like, if we're going to, first of all, if we're going to define what Hamas did on October 7th as a terrorist attack, then what has Israel been doing for the last friggin' 12 years, in which they disproportionately killed Palestinians to the tune of 5,500 of them, compared to 250 Palestinian Israelis killed? It was just way over and disproportionate. And just because Hamas did it in the way they did it, and taking hostages or killing civilians, that has been going on for quite some time. For Israel. So I would say we condemn all killing and just saying it is what it is. But the way the Israeli lobby and the government and our mainstream media and our government has tried to play what Hamas has done on October 7th as somewhere in a different category and way more barbaric than what Israel has done is bullshit. It's just to condone what they want to continue to do, and that's to carpet bomb civilians using what they call the let me say it right, the Dahaya doctrine, which is another term they use is mowing the lawn, in which they can blow up these buildings and whatnot because they say they're being used by terrorist groups like Hamas to go in and out of and to fire missiles and whatnot and everything. The thing that's crazy about it, that all this bombing that's going on, Israel has not released a statement on how many Hamas militants they've really actually killed. Now, we're close to 10,000 people. I would guess that 9,900 of them are all civilians. I don't know this for a fact, but I know this much. Hamas is deep down underground. They're waiting in their tunnels. The operation on October 7th was most about hitting military institutions and having a smash and grab operation. So people aren't talking about all these military institutions that they hit, which were along the border of Gaza, because the settlements have expanded so much, because Israel has never stopped expanding. They had never had the idea of they were never going to stop expanding. They were always going to expand. But it was a smash and grab operation, and they went in there and they grabbed up all that military gear and they brought it back into Gaza, and they're underground. So to sit there and try to separate the two, and secondly, I don't know why this government, the United States government, has to treat Israel like it's the 51st state. It's not the 51st state. We have, what I'm saying? These bombs that are being dropped on civilians are American bombs, and we have to face that fact. And it has always been an apartheid state. They removed people by violence off their land. They didn't remove Hamas from their land in 1948. They moved Palestinians off their land in 1948 and put them in the Gaza Strip, and that's why there is a Hamas. So if we're going to have to talk about this thing, we have to talk about this thing across the board. And I think that we've been forced in or bullied into the situation where we have to condemn Hamas first before we talk about anything else, when it should be the other way around. What the Israelis have done for years is what led to Hamas and other resistant groups. That's another thing people don't talk about. It's not just Hamas. It's resistant groups. And there's a reason why the Russian Federation doesn't treat Hamas like a terrorist group. They have a political wing. They have an office in Qatar. You know what I'm saying? And look what the Russians are trying to do. There's about 8 Russian Israeli citizens that have been taken hostage. They're trying to plead with them and bargain and get them released. The Israelis aren't even trying to do that. They're going ahead with the bombing because they don't care. Hamas was never the reason. Hamas was just the excuse. The beef has been with the Palestinians for quite some time. The Israelis feel they have a right to that land. They want them off that land. So what we're seeing taking place is almost like what we saw when we didn't have TVs and the internet with the Indians. It's a ethnic cleansing genocide that's taking place. And before anything, a ceasefire should be called because it's going to just get even more hairier in the next couple days. Sorry, go ahead, buddy.
Oh no, you made very valid points, and I agree with you. But I do think, like, this, regardless who did what first, like, they both have done. Hamas, obviously, it's one of those things where I don't think if you say Hamas did a terrorist attack or was responsible for it doesn't mean that Israel isn't equally, if not, done worse things throughout history. I think that's.
But they don't refer to the Israelis as terrorists, right? That's the whole thing. That's the buzzword there. The language does matter. Hamas terrorists, Israel, the most. What were they trying to say? The most. What's the? I don't want to use the word compassion. It's not the word. But they were trying to say that the Israeli army acts. They have something called knocking on the door, and this is something that Bassem Youssef, the Egyptian comedian, said, where they tell people, "Get out of your building. We're going to bomb it in 5 minutes." Oh, how nice of you! There's 10,000 Palestinians that have been killed right now, according to what they've found, and they're going through the rubble right now. Over 3,000 children have been killed, and they're going through the rubble. But there's 1.5 million Palestinians displaced. They got nowhere to go, nowhere to be. They don't have a home anymore. It's gone. And that is ridiculously disproportionate. And the language that we're still using, it's like that meme. Have you saw it? The lady's on the ground. She's a Palestinian lady with a dead baby. And you got all the news media and all the governments with a microphone. Will you condemn Hamas? If we're going to talk about what is really going on over there, and don't get me wrong, I think those, I'm going to say it, idiots who are part of the pro-Palestinian march that start ripping off the Israeli hostages that are missing they're not helping. If you're cheering on any side, you're not helping. But if we're just going to have a conversation about this, we should start having it on equal ground. And I think the way they've really bullied us and cornered us is to make sure that we have to condemn Hamas first before we talk about anything else. And by doing so, that condones and justifies the carpet bombing that's continuing to go on in Palestine and the Gaza Strip to this day.
Well, I think why it's easier to talk about Hamas first is, I'm talking about like the mainstream narrative and the mainstream media, is because they are considered like a military resistance movement. They're not like where like Israel is considered a country of people, so it's slightly different because that's literally what they're defined as, a military movement in Gaza. But absolutely true everything you're saying, and throughout the years I've without a doubt have seen things from the Palestinian perspective much more than from the Israel perspective, because obviously the fact that every Israel war and conflict seems to be a U.S. funded war and conflict, the fact that their lobbyists have incredible influence on our foreign policy and what we do, and throughout the years it's never made a whole lot of sense to why giving so much money to Israel and giving so much resources to them benefited us. It just never, I was a huge fan of Abby Martin's back in the day. She was, when she had Breaking the Set on RT, I used to watch it every morning before work, watch the episodes. And I'm trying to do my best to also not be so, because the thing is, like, when you grow up with a perspective on a situation,
so bias.
There's always in danger. Like, so if I grew up being this kind of person who always looked at this conflict as from the Palestinian perspective, because like I said, influences of mine, I've been listening to Low Key since he started rapping. I've been a fan of Abby Martin's. A lot of people who've kind of have been very outspoken and been pro-Palestine. And then as time goes by, you're like, okay, well, I always want to make sure I self-correct and reflect and make sure that origin of my perspective, that just it came from that side, that I will take the time to still listening to other perspectives for the purpose of like, hey, you know what? Maybe there's another side of the story that I'm not entertaining. And I think that is important, and if I come to the same conclusion, that's, without a doubt, good. That means that I was on the right side of history. But it is a difficult conversation, because historically you have to do a little bit of research. The Zionist movement, I mean, they don't represent every, I think it's true to say that every Zionist might be Jewish, but not every Jewish person is a Zionist. That there's some people who just are religious. They do the traditional stuff. They celebrate the holidays, but don't have Zionist perspectives on the world in regards to like, finding or needing to control that land. And and that's also important too, because I think what this issue does, like many of the issues that we've talked about, and really just about every political issue, is that it divides people, and it makes people look at another type of person as the other, and it demonizes them, and then it gets all of us fighting, when really the people pulling the strings and the people who are really benefiting from this could care less about these issues. You think the military industrial complex, you think the lobbyists, you think about it's all about resources, it's about power, it's about money, and this idea that it's about like there's some moral reasoning for these actions are just ridiculous.
Yeah, but people have to understand that the Zionist movement is part of the globalist movement, plain and simple. It is. I mean, if you want to look at the way a country treated their people when it came to the COVID situation. Are we going to be on YouTube, or can I speak?
No, I've been kicked off YouTube for a long time. So yeah.
Okay, gotcha. All right. I mean, the way what Netanyahu kind of bragged about the fact that he got so many vaccines and he got them early because he overpaid for them because he wanted them, and then he used the country like a petri dish, saying that this guy took this vaccine and that vaccine and whatnot, and then shared that data. Most of the data that we were getting when we were talking against the COVID-19, the vaccine in the beginning, was coming out of Israel, right? So, I mean, a lot of people have to understand that Netanyahu and the Zionist movement is part of the globalist movement. It's not you might think that it's just about an individual thing, about a certain group of people. It's a part of a bigger plan. People need to understand that. And really, to tell you the truth, the only way you can pull that off the way they did in Israel is if you convince the people there that they are the chosen ones, right? It's a different type of like enlightenedness. It's a different type of entity. And for the fact that they were just used, as an experiment, and the data there is ridiculous, the negative data out there and stuff like that. A lot of people need to wake up to what's going on. And that's the thing a lot of people don't realize is that the Netanyahu government, which that's the thing. The majority of the people in Israel right now, from what I've heard, from what Max Blumenthal has said, what Morgan Finkelstein has said, they're more Netanyahu and less Rabin. Rabin was that last great leader that was killed by a Zionist who wanted to have a way to coexist with the Palestinians, who wanted to find a way, who wanted to work with Yasser Arafat. And Yasser Arafat wasn't like the uber religious political leader. He was the economic leader. The PLO was looked upon as a secular government, you know what I'm saying? And they had economical projects they wanted to get together. Who helped squash that? Well, the World Bank, the IMF. They canceled a lot of deals, forcing the Israeli government to kind of walk away from what they were going to acknowledge, being that Palestine would have recognize the 67 borders and have 22% of the country. I mean, they were willing to settle with 22% of the country and still have a super Jewish majority. I mean, and it's crazy that they're not even meeting that. And it shows you their plan all along. They eventually plan to get all that land for themselves. They're continuing to do what they're doing in the West Bank. They haven't stopped. Hamas is not in the West Bank, so what's the excuse there? You know what I'm saying? 600,000 colonial settlers now, Israeli settlements now, settlers that are now inside the West Bank, which was supposed to be part of the Palestinian state. And we're running out of excuses. And there's only so long you can play the cards and the bullshit and the propaganda with us before people start to realize this stuff. It's going to not just common sense leftists like myself are coming to this conclusion. Everyday, average, normal people are starting to understand, wait a second, there's an actual concentration camp inside that country? Yeah, an actual concentration camp inside that country. So.
Yeah, and it's crazy. That's why people have to learn history because, I mean, you go all the way back to the fall of the Ottoman Empire. A lot of different religious people lived together and, in one country. And then when it was carved up by the Skype-Picot Agreement and they created countries purposely to constantly have conflict there. I mean, the Western Europeans never wanted to stabilize the Middle East. They just wanted to constantly keep it disabled so they could justify government interaction, military interaction, raping these parts of the world of their resources. And when you look at like who funds a lot of these terrorists, that supposedly hate American freedoms and American way of life, I mean, a lot of times it's the same people that are supposedly fighting them. And you saw it obviously in Afghanistan with the Bin Laden and fighting the Soviets, and they even sold it to Bin Laden as, hey, these are the anti-religious people, Russians that you need to fight against and whatnot. There's rumors of even Israel funding Hamas, right?
Hamas for quite some time. Some time, especially when Yasser Arafat was starting to get a lot of movement with the PLO, and let me tell you something. Though, if there's any criticism I hold towards the Palestinians right now is they need to find some more spokespeople. Right? I was out at an event not too long ago. I couldn't find enough people to talk to. We need spokespersons. The first time I saw Yasser Arafat on with the glasses and the hat, and then heard him speak, and even though they had subtitles there, he was very, looked very articulate and charismatic out there, and no more terrorist attacks, you know what I'm saying, and everything. They need spokespeople like out there. But once again, it's known, it's been linked. This is something that Ron Paul said on the floor of the House of Congress. Hamas was funded by Israel for quite some time. And as recent as 2019, Netanyahu was caught saying that we need to support Hamas, and we need to do this. Why? Because we want to make sure we split the Palestinian movement between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, because we don't want them coming together. It's a divide and conquer strategy. So for quite some time. So if you want to eliminate Hamas, the first thing you do, stop funding them. And for people to buy this whole we need to remove Hamas when you've been funding them the whole time, it's just sooner or later the American public needs the majority of people need to start coming over and calling bullshit. That alone should say this is an inside job, a quirky situation, and it's really not about Hamas. It's just about getting those people off that land.
And you have to do some research on all these very pro-Israel perspective people. Where are they getting their money? I brought up Low Key recently on his Instagram page. He shared a little post about Ben Shapiro and some of the organizations people he's linked to, and all the Israeli money he's getting. And have gotten, the Daily Wire and all this stuff, where they've gotten their funding. So that's the thing, that's the thing that people have to be very wary of. Sometimes they see somebody on TV or on YouTube or during a debate and they think, oh, this is just a person sharing their organic perspective on the situation, that they've researched the issue, they've come to this conclusion, and then you dig deeper and you realize, oh, geez, they've gotten money from this person, or they linked to that person, or they're a part of this organization and whatnot. And this is why people like yourself, Jimmy Dore, all these shows where it's just like it's a organic opinion. It's like you're researching and you're coming to a conclusion, and it's not your opinion's not based on who's funding you, like typically politicians and the warmongers that you see on TV.
Yeah, absolutely. And the great thing about these shows too, as well, is the way you can get educated in the middle of a show, right? Like Kurt seeing when Norman Finkelstein came over there, like, wait a second, I didn't know that Gaza was that small and that densely populated. I said, yeah. And it's funny because now he's been able to tell, he's like, well, listen, the majority of the education I have gotten about the situation has come from Jewish people themselves, not Arabs, not the Hamas people. Jews have taught me this. You know what I'm saying? So I love the whole experience about learning as the show is going on. Norman Finkelstein show was amazing. I had watched Dan Cohen's movie and did a lot of research. So before we did the movie, the show, we had a lot of the stuff that was going on in the movie. But hearing him elaborate and what's going on and tying everything together is quite amazing too as well. So it's listen, Norman Finkelstein did say when he came on the show that he believes the way to get us out of here and get a lot of clarity is to educate people on what's going on. Just lay out the facts. He was very in the zone that day, not being emotional, understanding what was coming from the Israeli government as far as the carpet bombing that was about to come on its way, because it's consistent with everything they've always done from 2014 to now, you know what I'm saying, and before that. So it's about educating not just ourselves, but of course, our audiences, and that's been an amazing journey throughout this whole process too, as well. I mean, despite all the sadness and the killing and the death that's going on, the education level, and I know a decent amount, but now I know a lot more than I knew before. You know what I'm saying? And it just laid out there. You can go do the research yourself. I'm wearing the Last American Vagabond thing. He's like, don't believe me, go believe yourself. Just question everything and go look for yourself. And being able to do that through this whole process has been amazing as well.
Now, our last clip is an anniversary JFK special made by the one and only James Corbett. Hope everyone had a happy Thanksgiving. See you all next week.
Welcome back, friends. Welcome back to another edition of the Corbett Report. I'm your host, as always, James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, coming to you from the increasingly chilly climes of Western Japan, here on November 22nd, 2023, with episode 454 of the Corbett Report podcast, JFK, From Mongoose to Gladio. Now, as you can divine from that title, if not from the particular date that this podcast is being released, November 22nd, yes, this podcast is about the JFK assassination. And I'm sure everyone in the audience, in the Corbett Report audience anyway, probably does know that November 22nd, 2023, marks the 60th anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy in Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas on November 22nd, 1963. But today also marks another anniversary, the 33rd anniversary of something that took place on November 22nd, 1990. And if you don't know the significance of that particular date, you are about to learn it, along with many, many other facts besides. In fact, there is a lot of information to go through in this episode, so I hope you will get your pen and paper and notebook handy, because there is an awful lot of information that you are about to get data dumped. And really, this represents the presentation that I made to the JFK Lancer Conference in Dallas, Texas this past weekend. Of course, I was here in Japan presenting virtually, but this is the presentation that I made to the JFK Lancer Conference. If you're unfamiliar with the JFK Lancer Conference, of course, I will throw in the link to the JFK Lancer so that you can find out more about it and the conference that is held there in Dallas every year around the time of the anniversary. This past weekend's conference and the speakers that were presenting there, some very illustrious JFK researchers that I am honored to be presenting alongside, and how you can get access to the virtual panels and things that were conducted anyway. So all of that information will be in today's episode at CorbettReport.com/JFKGladio, where you will also find a complete hyperlinked transcript of this entire presentation with all the links to all the documents and books and videos and everything that I mention in this. As I say, there's a lot of information to go through, so I hope you're ready for it. And all that being said, I will just, for people who don't know, I will only further add that if you are interested, I presented a JFK Lancer 3 years ago on the topic of the JFK Fed myth, and that is in the Corbett Report podcast archive, so I will also include the link back to that if you have not seen my presentation on that particular topic. But today, let's talk about JFK from Mongoose to Gladio. Greetings and welcome to all of you attending the JFK Lancer Conference. I am James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, and I welcome you here today from the land of the rising sun. That's right, I am here in Japan, where it is already tomorrow, and spoiler alert, I can let you know that, yes, the sun does indeed rise tomorrow. Prepare accordingly. But all silliness aside, I'd like to thank the organizers of this JFK Lancer Conference for giving me this chance to talk to you today here in November of 2023 on JFK from Mongoose to Gladio. Now, as you are all too well aware, on November 22nd, 1963, the President of the United States of America was assassinated in broad daylight in Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas. But as you may or may not be aware, on November 22nd, 1990, the European Parliament passed its Resolution on the Gladio Affair, in which they acknowledged the startling and then very fresh revelation that took place earlier that year of a clandestine network of NATO-run stay-behind armies that had been operating off the books and completely secretly in Europe for the previous 5 decades. Specifically, that resolution acknowledged that, quote, these organizations operated and continue to operate completely outside the law, since they are not subject to any parliamentary control, and that the secret armies have at their disposal independent arsenals and military resources that jeopardize the democratic structures of the countries in which they are operating. And the resolution then goes on to condemn the clandestine creation of manipulative and operational networks, and protested vigorously at the assumption by certain U.S. military personnel at SHAPE and in NATO of the right to encourage the establishment in Europe of a clandestine intelligence and operation network. Now, as I say, you may or may not be aware of that particular resolution. You may or may not be familiar with the history of Operation Gladio, or more broadly, the stay-behind armies that were being run by NATO throughout Europe for, well, at any rate, documentably, for the latter half of the 20th century. But once you do become familiar with that operation and with the clandestine networks that populated those stay-behind armies, at first glance you may think that, barring the coincidence of date, namely November 22nd, 1963 and November 22nd, 1990, there's really nothing to connect these two seemingly disparate events. But I will argue today that, well, there may be more of a connection than appears at first glance, at any rate. And in order to make that argument, I will start in the most unusual place, in the annals of Tinseltown, for some Hollywood predictive programming.
Then there are the wagering activities of yours, General. Particularly a betting pool on the Preakness.
Oh, come now, Mr. President.
Or perhaps more aptly classified, your personal and private code. It covers your plan for the military overthrow of the United States government.
I presume, Mr. President, you're prepared to back up that charge?
I am prepared to brand you for what you are, General. A strutting egoist with a Napoleonic power complex. And an out-and-out traitor.
Now that, for those not in the know, is 7 Days in May, the 1964 John Frankenheimer adaptation of a 1962 best-selling novel by Fletcher Nabel and Charles W. Bailey II, which posits a near-future crisis in which the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States plot to seize power and control of the federal government in a coup d'etat against the fictional president of that near-future universe, who is trying to sign a nuclear treaty with the Soviets. So, and oh, by the way, they use a military alert as cover for their plot. Now, of course, I am not suggesting that movies or books or popular entertainment have any connection whatsoever or in any way portend events that may be about to take place, like, say, when the Lone Gunman spin-off series from the X-Files, which depicted a group of political/military insiders plotting to take control of a commercial airliner and slam it into the World Trade Center in order to gin up wars in the Middle East for the benefit of the military-industrial complex, as if that had anything whatsoever to do with the events that took place 5 months later. I mean, you'd have to be a conspiraloon to suggest anything of that sort, wouldn't you? I mean, the idea that a 9/11 inside job could be portrayed on national TV just months before the events of 9/11/2001. Who's connecting those dots? Certainly not me, but I am certainly suggesting that 7 Days in May was not a prediction of a military coup in the offing in the JFK White House, but a warning, at any rate, of things to come in the ongoing power struggle that was taking place in the corridors of power there in Washington, D.C., and which, as a Washington columnist of many years, someone like Fletcher Nabel would know something about. And in fact, as we now know, one of the biggest champions of this book, this bestseller, 7 Days in May, was JFK himself. That's right. As I say, we now know that he was sent an advance copy of the book by Fletcher Nabel and was exhorted by friends to read it. And upon doing so, he found it to be quite interesting for reasons that should become obvious. So he was personally excited about the project, personally encouraged Frankenheimer and Kirk Douglas and others to get on board with the project, as reported, for example, by Thurston Clarke in JFK's Last 100 Days, where he writes, quote, "What is certain is that by the fall of 1962, the president, JFK, not only believed a coup was possible, but had repeatedly discussed its likelihood. That fall, Harper and Row published 7 Days in May, a thriller by Fletcher Nabel and Charles Bailey II, about a coup against the U.S. president instigated by his decision to sign a controversial nuclear arms pact with the Soviet Union. Nabel got the idea from an interview with Air Force Chief of Staff Curtis LeMay shortly after the Bay of Pigs, more on which later, but as Thurston Clarke reports later on in that book, the actor Kirk Douglas was serving himself in a buffet dinner line in the White House in January 1963 when Kennedy came up behind him and asked, "Do you intend to make a movie out of 7 Days in May?" Douglas confirmed that he was producing and starring in a film version of the book being directed by John Frankenheimer. Kennedy said, "Good," and as their meals cooled, spent 20 minutes explaining why Nabel's book would make a great movie. Pierre Salinger told Frankenheimer that the president wanted the film made, quote, as a warning to the Republic. Schlesinger thought he hoped it would raise the consciousness about the problems involved if the generals got out of control, and might also serve as a warning to the generals. After the Defense Department denied Frankenheimer permission to film at the Pentagon, Kennedy took a long weekend in Hyannisport so the director could shoot crowd scenes outside the White House. So, more than a tangential connection, and lest it need to be spelled out, JFK's interest in this book was not based on any literary merits it may or may not have had, but precisely because it could serve as that warning to the Republic about the very real events that were taking place behind the scenes in Washington, D.C. in those critical years of the early 1960s. And to be clear, you did not need to be a James Bond super sleuth with top secret clearance or a Beltway insider even to know and to pick up on the very ominous signs of a potential military coup d'etat that were evident there in the early 1960s. For example, what real-world events could people possibly point to? The average citizen in the United States would undoubtedly have seen or witnessed to make them think along those lines. Well, how about the very preface of the 7 Days in May book? What did they open with? Of course, a quotation from President Eisenhower's infamous farewell speech, in which he not only coined the term military-industrial complex, but warned against its acquisition of power.
Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. we must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought. I wonder what he meant by that. Well, anyway, given the escalating series of military/intelligence surprises that were awaiting Kennedy as he entered the Oval Office, from his literal first surprise in the door of, hey, Mr. President, you know that whole missile gap thing that you were campaigning on? Well, it turns out, yeah, that was totally made up BS propaganda. To, of course, as Richard Nixon infamously called it, the whole Bay of Pigs thing, aka Operation Zapata. Zapata Oil? CIA front company, George H.W. Bush? More coincidences. AKA that operation, that CIA-sponsored and crafted operation to use a bunch of Cuban counter-revolutionary guerrillas to try to overthrow Castro in Cuba, and which CIA Director Dulles told JFK, don't worry, we've got this whole thing covered from soup to nuts. You can just sit back and relax. Oops! Oh, that didn't go so well. Because, as was determined and disclosed in General Maxwell Taylor's after-action report, actually, Dulles and the CIA knew that the Soviets had advance warning of the plot, and thus knew that it was going to fail, but they kind of didn't bother to inform you about all of those niggly little details. So it's perhaps no surprise that the idea of a military coup in the United States was so much a part of the 1960s zeitgeist that it was not only being picked up on by Beltway insiders and writers like Nebel and Bailey, but by the average Joe, including, of course, some of JFK's friends, who did pressure him on this particular topic. For example, as we can read in Paul Red Fay's memoirs about his time as JFK's confidant, The Pleasure of His Company, he relates the story of how a friend of the Kennedys was asking JFK about the possibility of a 7 Days in May scenario happening in the United States, and JFK reportedly replied, "It's possible. It could happen in this country, but the conditions would have to be just right. If, for example, the country had a young president and he had a Bay of Pigs, there would be a certain uneasiness. Maybe the military would do a little criticizing behind his back. But this would be written off as the usual military dissatisfaction with civilian control. Then, if there were another Bay of Pigs, the reaction of the country would be, is he too young and inexperienced? The military would almost feel that it was their patriotic obligation to stand ready to preserve the integrity of the nation, and only God knows just what segment of democracy that would be defending if they overthrew the elected establishment." As if steeling himself for the final challenge, he continued, "Then, if there were a third Bay of Pigs, it could happen." Pausing long enough for all of us to assess the significance of his comment, he concluded with an old Navy phrase, "But it won't happen on my watch." How reassuring. All right, so then, if the idea of a military coup of the, say, Joint Chiefs of Staff or high-ranking military officials in the United States was not the LSD-induced fever dream of some wild-eyed conspiraloons and was being picked up on by the general public, then what specifically was swirling in the zeitgeist? What were people seeing in the Daily News and other outlets that would get them to pick up on this idea and amplify it and even send it back to JFK himself? Well, as it turns out, there were no shortage of candidates for real-life General Scotts, who might have been the basis for Nebel and Bailey's novel, let alone some of the rumors that were swirling around at the time. So let's take a look at some of these candidates, because there were several of them that contributed to this growing, palpable sense that the military may, in fact, stage some form of coup d'etat, and may have the means and opportunity to do so. So let's take a look at some of the candidates. For example, we have Edwin Walker, who was a U.S. Army Major General, a decorated combat vet of World War II and Korea, and a rabid Kennedy hater who was targeted for assassination by Lee Harvey Oswald, according to the Warren Commission. I know this is absolute bread and butter, first grade kind of stuff for the hardcore dedicated JFK researchers in the Lancer crowd, but I wonder how many people in the general public know anything about that whole Lee Harvey Oswald, Edwin Walker assassination attempt diversion. I think, once again, probably the gap between people who have researched this their whole lives and people who have kind of heard something about it once or twice would be quite vast. But anyway, yes, so that Edwin Walker. And to be fair, he wasn't just a Kennedy hater. He was a, well, every president since FDR hater. As a card-carrying member of the Birch Society, he was opposed to racial integration. And he did lead the federal troops in the integration of Little Rock's Central High School, but only after President Eisenhower refused to accept his resignation on the matter. And he was later officially admonished by the Commander-in-Chief of the Army in Europe, General Bruce C. Clark, for his attempts to indoctrinate troops in political matters, which became something of a scandal, and which ultimately led to his resignation in 1961, when he refused to accept a reassignment to Hawaii. And basically rather than serve any longer for the Kennedy administration, he became the only general in U.S. general in the 20th century to resign. So that was obviously a political statement, which he then immediately parlayed into a political career of his post-military career, essentially, as he became something of a political activist, making fiery speeches of the McCarthyite variety and becoming an honorary Dallasite?
It is my pleasure and privilege, General Walker, to present to you at this time this certificate endowing you with all of the emoluments and the privileges of honorary citizenship in this great city of Dallas.
Ah, that's right. Edwin Walker was made an honorary citizen of Dallas in December of 1961 by then Mayor Earl Cabell, the brother of the former deputy director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Charles P. Cabell, who was forced to resign in 1962 along with Dulles, and Earl Cabell himself having been a CIA agent since 1956. Well, that might be some interesting tidbits to file away in the information bank when it comes to Walker and his associations. But what else did General Walker get up to? Oh, that's right. He helped to incite the Battle of Oxford, aka the Ole Miss riots of 1962, that JFK, for one, referred to as a Bay of Pigs, or compared to the Bay of Pigs anyway, as we now know from the now-released Kennedy tapes. He said, "I haven't had such an interesting time since the Bay of Pigs," in those recordings. And I wonder if that counts as Bay of Pigs number 2 in JFK's postulated 3 Bay of Pigs countdown to a military coup d'etat. Anyway, what else did he talk about during those hours in that those frantic hours of the Ole Miss riots when Bobby and various aides were scurrying around giving him news about what was happening? Oh, that's right, of course. As we can find from the Kennedy tapes, one speaker in the tape says, "Have you read 7 Days in May?" To which President Kennedy says, "Yeah." Someone says, "Damn good book. I thought that very interesting." "Yeah, I read it straight through. It's interesting." "Why didn't you like it?" Or "I didn't like it." "Unrealistic?" "And you thought it was too far-fetched?" "No, I thought this sort of awful amateurs dialogue. You know, it was a 35. No, it's not great writing." And then JFK says, "I mean, it's not any good at that point. The only character that came out at all was the general. The president was awfully vague, but I thought the general was a pretty good character." And then they go back immediately to talking about General Walker. So you don't have to go very far out on a limb to connect some of these people and events. And what else was Edwin Walker famous or infamous for? Oh, that's right, as was eventually found out. Remember those wanted for treason handbills that were being passed around Dallas on the day of November 22nd, 1963? Well, who was behind that? Oh, right, Edwin Walker was one of the people responsible for that handbill. So I can't find any direct admission directly from Nebel or Bailey that Edwin Walker was necessarily considered as a type for the General Scott character in 7 Days in May, but one of the president's aides in the book 7 Days in May does specifically cite General Walker as an example of a general who got out of line in 1961 and was promptly relieved by Kennedy. So there is that connection. And in another extremely interesting coincidence, there was another piece of paper that was slated to be released on November 22nd, 1963, that bore some eerie resemblance to Walker's handbill. As David Talbot reports in his book Brothers, the day Kennedy was assassinated, Paramount Pictures, the distributor of 7 Days in May, planned to run an ad for the film using a quote from one of its fictional military conspirators. "Impeach him? Hell, there are better ways of getting rid of him." The studio yanked the ad at the last minute, fearing it was too provocative, narrowly avoiding an embarrassing coincidence on the very day the president was shot, Variety later reported. Indeed. Well, I don't believe, as far as I know, there has never been a reproduction of that ad or any image of that ad has ever surfaced, but one can certainly imagine it might have looked eerily similar to that wanted for treason handbill that was in the hands of certain Dallasites even as JFK was being shot at. So, a lot of very interesting connections and parallels there. But let's move on to the next character in this rogues gallery of military madmen, specifically Curtis LeMay. Of course, like Walker, as you may or may not know, this LeMay was also a decorated general, this time a U.S. Air Force general. He has become known to history as a man of psychopathic bloodlust, exemplified perhaps in his exuberance for Operation Meeting House, which is better known as the Tokyo firebombing, in which, according to the U.S. Bureau of Naval Personnel, quote, probably more persons lost their lives by fire at Tokyo in a 6-hour period than at any time in the history of man. And perhaps the relevant Curtis LeMay quip on the incident is, if, as a result of the bombing, the war has been shortened by even 1 day, then the attack will have served its purpose. You know, come to think of it, I think I have a clip of him saying that.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
Sorry, my mistake there. I tend to get those two confused. Anyway, at any rate, LeMay has been suggested by various film critics over the years, and book reviewers and others, as a potential source of inspiration for the fictional General Scott in 7 Days in May, but perhaps he was more accurately lampooned in Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove as the cigar-chomping, foul-mouthed, straight-talking, fluoride truth-telling General Jack D. Ripper. Whatever the case, LeMay certainly did hate the Kennedy administration. The vindictiveness of those people, how ruthless they were. They expected to be stepped on like the cockroaches they were when LBJ came into power, at least according to LeMay's very colorful oral history that he provided the LBJ library a few years later. And at any rate, at the bottom line, we can say for absolute certain, according to Nebel anyways, that LeMay certainly was an inspiration for the fictional coup of 7 Days in May, because, specifically, Nebel was interviewing him he was a Look magazine columnist at the time, writing about Washington for many years. He was interviewing LeMay when LeMay kept going off record to talk about the cowardice of JFK and the Kennedy administration at the Bay of Pigs, and that definitely caught Nebel and Bailey's interest, and the more they probed around and started asking questions, the more they found there were high-ranking military and intelligence establishment figures who definitely had an axe to grind with Kennedy, and that, in Nebel's own account, led him to thinking of the great what if, and bada bing bada boom, we have a story about a military coup in the United States. So definitely LeMay is in that mix of sources for inspiration of this idea. Moving right along in our cavalcade of characters here is Edward Lansdale. Edward Geary Lansdale, a general in the U.S. Air Force who was appointed as the Chief of Operations of Operation Mongoose in November of 1961. Specifically, I'll direct you to the actual memorandum that was provided to Bobby Kennedy and others in the JFK administration at that time, summarizing the meetings that had been taking place in November 1961 about the Cuba project, the ongoing Cuba project, but this was the formalization of what became Operation Mongoose, and specifically Directive Number 1 of this memo: we will use our available assets to go ahead with the discussed project in order to help Cuba overthrow the communist regime. And number 2, this program will be conducted under the general guidance of General Lansdale, acting as Chief of Operations. So you can go on reading that document and the various others associated with Operation Mongoose that have come out over the years. But long story short, yes, he was tasked with overthrowing the regime, which is vague enough language that it may or may not encompass assassination. At any rate, we do know that assassination was very much a subject of interest of Lansdale's mongoose compatriot / CIA psychopath, Bill Harvey, and his ZR rifle, which I'm sure JFK researchers in the crowd will be very familiar with. Now, why was Lansdale brought in specifically? Well, supposedly it is because of his very theatrical style of psychological operations, exemplified in the infamous story of his efforts against the Filipino communist guerrilla fighters, in which he supposedly, and who knows how much of this is PR, but at any rate, supposedly, infamously, managed to convince some of those guerrilla fighters that they were being haunted and hunted by Aswangs, which are essentially vampire-like creatures, blood-sucking demons from Filipino mythology, by capturing some of those fighters, killing them, draining them of their blood, and leaving them to be found by their compatriots. Lovely stuff. And anyway, that was apparently what attracted the JFK and RFK and others in the administration to him, and JFK being quite a James Bond devotee and interested in those types of very theatrical ideas. And so Lansdale was brought in to provide, and boy did he provide many ideas for tactical subversion techniques and sabotage and other such things that could be done, various fireworks of various sorts that could be waged in a ongoing counter-revolution against Castro. Now, the question is, did Bobby, or JFK himself, actually approve assassination specifically on the record in black and white as part of these operations? Well, that depends who you ask. And if you ask Lansdale, he will tell you yes, Bobby Kennedy did approve that. As per the Mary Farrell Foundation, quote, whether plots to assassinate Castro were part of this operation, and whether Operation Mongoose, and whether Robert Kennedy or President Kennedy condoned them, has remained a point of controversy to this day. Lansdale himself said that Robert Kennedy was aware of assassination plotting. One memo from Lansdale to RFK in early 1962, uncovered by the Church Committee, says that we might uncork the touchdown play independently of the institutional program we are spurring. So, some indications along those lines. At any rate, certainly Cuban meddling, assassination operations, Lansdale, there's quite a stew brewing there, but who was in charge of Lansdale, and what were they cooking up? Oh, well, of course, that brings us to the next cretin in this rogues gallery of military psychopaths, Lyman Lemnitzer.
In recent months, it has quite commonly been suggested that the military function of NATO and of Allied Command Europe within NATO is losing some of its urgency. The reason usually ascribed is an alleged softening by the Soviets in their relations with the Atlantic nations. The argument most frequently cited to support this view is the signing of the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty.
Now that, of course, was the very real U.S. General Lyman Lemnitzer, who was appointed as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff by Eisenhower in 1960 and served in that position until he was shunted off elsewhere by JFK in late 1962, warning about those who would use the excuse of a nuclear test ban treaty with the Soviets to go soft in the Cold War, not to be confused in any way with the fictional General Scott of the fictional 7 Days in May, who heads a military coup in order to depose a president that he accuses of going soft with the Soviets in the Cold War by signing a nuclear test ban treaty with those damn Ruskies. No relation at all. Got it? Okay, good. Well, anyway, Lemnitzer was a unlikely candidate for chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you might say. A devout Lutheran by upbringing and also a Freemason. Lemnitzer was a middling student of no particular skills who left no particular impression on any of his classmates or teachers. He graduated near the bottom of his class from West Point in 1920, but failed to make any waves whatsoever in the military or be noticed by anyone. I will point even to his fawning biography, which notes that his, quote, his first 20 years of service were unremarkable. not the first year or two, not the first 5, not the first 10, no, the first 20 years of his military service were unremarkable. So let's skip over that and jump to World War II, where he was plucked from a relative obscurity by Eisenhower, who personally recruited him to plan the Allied landings in North Africa and Sicily in World War II. And it was Eisenhower who basically stewarded over Lyman and his career from that point onward, making sure to help him rise through the ranks. And it was thus then after We Like Ike achieved his Ike for President aspirations in 1952 that Lemnitzer's military career really began to take off, and suddenly, he was having all sorts of successes. He was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Far East Command in 1955, Vice Chief of Staff of the Army in 57, and finally, as I say, appointed Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff by Eisenhower in 1960. A pretty remarkable rise after 20 years of completely unremarkable service. But Lemnitzer, too, found that he was not a fan of the Kennedy administration. After having served in the war hero general / president administration of Eisenhower, he found that the Kennedys were a little less to his liking. And so, for example, I mean, it didn't take long for sparks to begin to fly between the two camps, the military camp and the incoming Kennedy administration. So we saw, for example, in July 1961, specifically at a National Security Council meeting that was held on July 20th of 1961, Lemnitzer came in guns blazing, figuratively and literally, proposing a surprise nuclear attack on the Ruskies, which prompted Kennedy to walk out of the meeting in disgust, remarking bitterly to Dean Rusk, "And we call ourselves the human race." Well, Lemnitzer, need it be said, was not popular in the Kennedy White House. For example, Special Assistant to the President Arthur Schlesinger told David Talbot in 2007 he, as in JFK, thought Lemnitzer was a dope. Even Jackie did not hold back her acid tongue to lash out at the boor Lemnitzer. We all thought well of him until he made the mistake of coming into the White House one Saturday morning in a sport jacket. How dare he? But after the Bay of Pigs shenanigans and the unhinged nuclear warmongering, it was ultimately a Cuban invasion proposal from the Joint Chiefs of Staff in March '62 that sealed Lemnitzer's fate with the Kennedy Oval Office. Specifically, tasked by Operation Mongoose Chief of Operations Ed Lansdale, the aforementioned Lansdale, to furnish, quote, pretexts which they consider would provide justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, led by Lemnitzer, tabled what has been referred to as, quote, the most corrupt plan ever created by the U.S. government, end quote, which, of course, is a pretty tall order to fulfill, but I think this one does it. This was Operation Northwoods, and if you're in my regular audience, I'm sure you have heard about and hopefully read this document by now, but if not, well, the document, which is a preliminary submission plan intended to be harmonized with inputs from different agencies in a time-phased plan of action, really does have to be read to be believed. So, of course, it will be provided in the hyperlinked transcript for this presentation that will be posted to my website at corbettreport.com/JFKGladio in the coming days. If you are watching this at the JFK Lancer Conference, stay tuned for that. But anyway, if you do go and read this document, you will find that here in these pages in black and white, the top-ranking officials of the U.S. military, presided over by Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Lyman Lemnitzer, put their pen to paper and signed on the bottom line on blatantly, undeniably illegal and treasonous acts in order to justify a military invasion of Cuba in the minds of the American public. Such acts including staging a false flag attack on the U.S. base in Guantanamo to be blamed on the Cubans, staging a Remember the Maine incident by blowing up a ship in Guantanamo Bay and blaming it on the Cubans, staging a false flag communist Cuban terror campaign in the Miami area, in other Florida cities, and even in Washington. Sinking a boatload of Cuban refugees, real or simulated, interestingly, staging the assassination of Cubans living in the United States, faking a Cuban Air Force attack on a civilian jetliner by swapping out a real civilian aircraft with an exact duplicate drone, then pretending that the drone came under attack by Cuban MiGs, broadcasting a Mayday message from this drone, and then blowing it up, blaming it obviously on Castro. Absolute madness, and psychopathic madness at that. There is no record of precisely how Defense Secretary McNamara, to whom the Operation Northwoods memo is addressed, actually responded to the memo, but the plan wasn't pursued, for whatever that is worth. And what we do know is that Lemnitzer was hauled into an Oval Office meeting with JFK 3 days after Northwoods was forwarded to McNamara, and that meeting did not go to Lemnitzer's liking, as Talbot reports in Brothers. Quote, on March 16th, 3 days after his meeting with McNamara, Lemnitzer was summoned by President Kennedy to the Oval Office for a discussion of Cuba's strategy that was also attended by McCone, Bundy, Lansdale, and Taylor. At one point, the irrepressible Lansdale began holding forth as usual on the improving conditions for popular revolt inside Cuba, adding that once the glorious anti-Castro revolution began, we must be ready to intervene with U.S. forces if necessary. This brought an immediate reaction from Kennedy, ever alert after the Bay of Pigs about being sandbagged into a military response in Cuba. The group was not proposing that he authorize U.S. military intervention, was it? No, Taylor and the others immediately rushed to assure him. But Lemnitzer couldn't restrain himself. He jumped in at that moment to run Operation Northwoods up the flagpole. The general spared the president the plan's more gruesome brainstorms, such as blowing up people on the streets of Miami and the nation's capital and blaming it on Cuba, but he informed Kennedy that the Joint Chiefs, quote, had plans for creating plausible pretexts to use force against Cuba, with the pretexts either attacks on U.S. aircraft or a Cuban action in Latin America for which we would retaliate, end quote. Kennedy was not amused. He fixed Lemnitzer with a hard look and said, bluntly, that we were not discussing the use of U.S. military force, according to Lansdale's notes on the meeting. The president icily added that Lemnitzer might find he did not have enough divisions to fight in Cuba if the Soviets responded to his Caribbean gambit by going to war in Berlin or elsewhere. But some people just don't get the message, so continuing with Talbot, despite the president's cold reaction, the Joint Chiefs chairman persisted in his war campaign. About a month after that White House meeting, Lemnitzer convened his fellow service chiefs in the tank, as the JCS conference room was called. Under his direction, they hammered out a stern memo to McNamara insisting that the Cuban problem be solved in the near future. That would never be accomplished by waiting around for Ed Lansdale's fairy tale popular uprising, the memo made clear. There was only one way of getting the job done. The Joint Chiefs of Staff recommend that a national policy of early military intervention in Cuba be adopted by the United States. Lemnitzer was wearing out Kennedy and McNamara's patience. After a National Security Council meeting in June, the president took the general aside and told him he wanted to send him to Europe to become NATO's new Supreme Allied Commander. Kennedy would replace Lemnitzer as the nation's top military man with the more amenable Max Taylor. He would have one less warmonger to harass him about Cuba. All right, I suggest people who are unfamiliar with this history really familiarize themselves with the documents that we have about this. It is truly remarkable that, especially that memo that was sent to McNamara, obviously to JFK via McNamara, really, for JFK's attention, saying, we have to solve this problem and we have to use a military solution. It was about as close to outright military subordination as you can get within an administration, and JFK knew exactly what was on the table, for no other reason than because he's read 7 Days in May and knows how that story, well, how it ends in the book versus how it might end in real life. Anyway, if JFK thought he was going to solve his military problems or taking care of it by telling him, we're shuffling you off, don't worry. Well, in October 1962, he got another surprise. It was called the Cuban Missile Crisis, and somehow, miraculously, Kennedy was able to thread the needle, not just with the Soviets, but with the military, which was on his back about this problem, with JCS chief still being Lemnitzer at that time, by using his brother Bobby as a secret backdoor channel to Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. And as Khrushchev remembered in his autobiography, quoting Bobby Kennedy, quote, even though the president himself is very much against starting a war over Cuba, an irreversible chain of events could occur against his will. That is why the president is appealing directly to Chairman Khrushchev for his help in liquidating this conflict. If the situation continues much longer, the president is not sure that the military will not overthrow him and seize power. The American army could get out of control. Again, it might be a question of which source you're believing, because other people didn't back Khrushchev up on that. But at any rate, that's the way Khrushchev remembered it. But once through that craziness, with not only his reputation intact, but his body and the bodies of everyone else on the planet still intact, amazingly, JFK had to dispose of Lemnitzer, and this is the way Richard Cottrell puts it in his book, Gladio, NATO's Dagger at the Heart of Europe. JFK emerged from the crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis, with his prestige vastly enhanced everywhere, that is, except Pentagonia. Kennedy's refusal to snuff out Castro and worse, permitting the United States to be humbled in the world arena by the Soviet Union, united them once again under Lemnitzer's authority. The danger to the head of the state returned with renewed intensity. Barely had the heat of the immediate emergency cooled, then Kennedy struck with an iron fist. He decided on a clever, constructive dismissal of his troublesome commander. Lemnitzer would be denied his due right of a second term of office as chief of staff, effectively cashiered, and given his marching orders right away. A humiliating demotion would be disguised, somewhat at any rate, by secondment to the top NATO command in France. If it was a signal that Kennedy intended to stop the rot in the military, then his decision to install his court favorite, General Maxwell Taylor, in Lemnitzer's stead could only be seen as another calculated insult. It was a Solomonic judgment in which Kennedy excelled, like his calm resolution of the missile crisis. Sending Lemnitzer into quarantine on the other side of the Atlantic, in charge of America's front line with the Russians, his mischievous hands would be too preoccupied to plot trouble on the home front. Deprived of Lemnitzer's presence in Washington, trouble in the ranks would gutter out. Kennedy miscalculated badly on both counts. All right, why was it a miscalculation? Well, for many reasons, but also because Gladio. That's why. Yeah, and what was Operation Gladio? Well, okay, good question. First of all, fact check to satisfy the fact checkers in the crowd. What most people commonly refer to as Operation Gladio. Well, they're misnaming that, because in fact, Operation Gladio refers specifically to the Italian branch of a much more broader program of a NATO clandestine network of secret stay-behind armies that were put in place in NATO member states in Europe and in Turkey and even some neutral states, non-NATO members, with or usually without the knowledge of those nations' security forces or political leaders, supposedly to commit sabotage and subversion in the event of a Soviet invasion, but in reality, it was a bunch of fascists and literal ex-Nazis and others who staged false flag terror attacks to blame on left-wing governments, assisted in and or organized and or helped in various ways with political assassinations and other assorted nastiness. And there is a lot more to say on this front. If you want To hear that, you would best turn to NATO's Secret Armies, Operation Gladio and Terrorism in Western Europe by Daniele Ganser, who I had the privilege of interviewing very recently on the Corbett Report about his work, including his work on Operation Gladio.
I wrote this book, NATO's Secret Army, and the subtitle is Operation Gladio and Terrorism in Western Europe. And that's my PhD, so I put, 4 years into this of my life. And I really spent a lot of time working on this. And what I can say is, oops, sorry, this is not very solid. Put this here, maybe that much. What I can say is that people don't know what Operation Gladio is. I mean, ask your average friend and ask him, how about Operation Gladio? What do you think about it? They go like, Operation Gladio, and they basically say they know the film Gladiator. Then they go, yeah, that's a film which is really cool, but it's like 2,000 years ago, where the Gladio is this short sword. That's a Gladio. And that's also the reason why it was called Operation Gladio. But in the historical context, the main person there is Giulio Andreotti, who was the Italian prime minister, and he blew the whistle in the year 1990. So that's just at the end of the Cold War. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. And in the year 1990, there was a bit of a transition period in Europe. Many things changed. Germany reunited. The Berlin Wall had fallen in 1989. So it was a period where we had secrets from the Cold War coming to the surface. Very interesting. At the same time, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and then we had Operation Desert Storm and all that. But Giulio Andreotti was an insider in Italy. He was prime minister, and he really knew Italian politics inside out. And he said, there's a secret army in this country. And people were like, really? Are you kidding? Because obviously there cannot be a secret army in a country. If you have an army in a country, the leader of the army, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the generals, they have to be known. The defense minister, he has to be known. The size of the army has to be known. The budget of the army has to be known. And Giulio Andreotti said, well, this army is secret. We didn't, Parliament didn't know about it, and judges didn't know about it, and journalists didn't know about it. Professors at universities didn't know about it, and people on the streets certainly didn't know about it. So there was a huge scandal. It was called the scandal of Gladio. And then the Belgian defense minister at the time was in Italy, and he was, talking to Andreotti, and he was going, well, but that's typical Italy. You have all these secret structures. I'm so glad we don't have that. And then Andreotti said to the Belgian defense minister, well, you have a secret army in Belgium as well. And, he literally, his jaw dropped, and he was going like, what? I'm the defense minister. I mean, I should know about it. So he flew back from Italy to Belgium. His name was Guy Coem. And he talked to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and said, I have something to ask you. Do we have a secret army here? And then the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said, yes. And then the defense minister, Belgian defense minister, said, why am I not, in the loop? Why I'm not being informed? And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said, well, defense ministers come and go. We're here, professional military people, and we're here to stay. And that was a huge scandal, because at that point you could really say defense ministers in some countries were not informed. In Switzerland, which is not a NATO country, we had Caspar Filigo, who was the defense minister. Now, Filigo was not aware that there was a secret army in Switzerland with the code name P26. And when the scandal broke, he said, I didn't know about it. So it was not only that people on the street or journalists or people in parliament didn't know about it. Some people on the level of defense minister had no clue. And when I looked at the data in more detail, I found out that these secret armies had been set up by the CIA and the MI6. And William Colby at the time in the 70s admitted that these secret armies existed, and then it was forgotten again. And Giulio Andreotti then confirmed, yes, these secret armies existed, and the overall name is called Stay Behind. And the idea is, if there is a Soviet invasion in Western Europe, Then these secret armies would become active in the sense of a guerrilla network. They would use explosives and guns and just, small guerrilla tactics to blow up supply lines of enemies who would then occupy Western Europe. So NATO had a meeting in 1990 because it was very embarrassing for NATO, because Andreotti said NATO is coordinating this. And the Supreme Allied Commander Europe then said, okay, well, let's have a meeting. And Manfred Wörner was the Secretary General of NATO at the time, and he said, "This is explosive, and let's see that the media doesn't dig deep." So on one day they said, "Yes, we had a secret army," and on the second day they had another spokesman coming forward in Brussels in NATO headquarters who said, "What we said yesterday is wrong. And furthermore, we cannot comment on Gladio." It was really funny.
And I love the little nugget that you have in your book that they even denied the existence of that previous spokesperson who admitted NATO's role in Gladio to you, right?
Yeah, it was a total. They messed it up. It was one of those things where you say that's the way you shouldn't do it. But then they had a closed meeting of just NATO ambassadors. We're still in the year 1990. So that is now 33 years ago. So many people don't know it. It's just history. And these NATO ambassadors came together, and most of these NATO ambassadors didn't even know. Okay, so even on the level of NATO ambassadors, it was top secret. And the problem that we have now with Operation Gladio is it is known that it existed. We have confirmation from former generals who were in the networks. It is known that it existed not only in Italy, but also in Greece, in Turkey, in Germany. In Germany, we had former Nazis who were in the network, so that's also confirmed. We had these secret armies in neutral countries like Sweden and Austria and Switzerland, which shouldn't be, because it was a NATO network. Why have them in neutral countries? And why have former SS people in Germany? And why have, there's lots of questions coming to mind. It's really quite the opposite of what you learn when you study history or international politics. If you study politics, let's say you're 20 years old, then you go like, okay, democracy, it works like that. You have the executive branch with the president and the defense minister and the foreign minister and the boss of the CIA and whatever. But you also have parliament, the House and the Senate. And they really control what the executive is doing. They control that. That's how it's done. And if something is done against the law, then you have the Supreme Court who will really say stick to the law. That's what you're being told when you're a student. And you take notes and you say, oh, okay, the executive is controlled by the legislative branch, and the judicative will intervene if there's a problem. And then you look at real life, and you find out the legislative branch, so parliaments all over Europe, had no idea. They just had no idea. The judicial branch, they never even touched upon the topic. And within the executive branch, you had the level of need to know that some were informed, others were not. So I wrote the book from that perspective and said, okay, this is clearly unacceptable. You cannot call yourself a democracy when you don't even know whether you have a secret army or not. We're not talking details. These are armed people.
Now, obviously, there is so much more to say about Operation Gladio and what it was and what it achieved. And Gantzer does go on to say a lot of that in that interview, so I hope you'll go and check it out. But more importantly, I hope you will check out the book, NATO's Secret Armies, Operation Gladio and Terrorism in Western Europe, which really was some groundbreaking original research that was conducted by Gantzer and remains a key book on the subject in the English language. So in the interest of time, since I am already running out of time in this presentation, I will just say that, long story short, Operation Gladio was all of the Northwoods-style dirty tricks and disgusting deeds rolled into one sprawling, decades-long attempt to ensure that NATO and its paramilitary minions could direct European democracy in whichever direction they wished. The greatest dream of General Scott, perhaps. well, Lemnitzer at any rate. And Gladio has been implicated in everything from military coups and assassination attempts against, for example, de Gaulle in France, who got so galled, or de Gaulle, that he kicked NATO out of France. And the horrific string of bombings and terror attacks in Italy, known as the Years of Lead, the advent of which just exactly happens to overlap with Lemnitzer's tenure as Supreme Allied Commander Europe of NATO, in which he would have undoubtedly had some connection to the goings-on of the Gladio network, although exactly what those connections are remain hidden and covered in layers and reams of official secrecy. But at any rate, Lemnitzer, did he just happen to coincide with the advent of the Years of Lead, or was it part of a Northwoods-style plan that had been transplanted over to Europe? Obviously, much more information and digging needs to be done on that front, but suffice it to say, did JFK solve his problems by shuffling Lemnitzer over to Europe? Well, apparently not. Okay, so what does this mean in terms of November 22nd, 1963 is the real question that we're addressing today. So we can, at any rate, we can say there was real talk of a military coup d'etat during Kennedy's presidency. And there were multiple high-ranking military officials and, of course, intelligence officials involved in various plots, both overt and covert, to effect some sort of military coup or some sort of takeover of power from JFK, specifically the Kennedy administration. And JFK himself was concerned about the possibility of a military coup and did have his own connection to operations like Mongoose and tangentially through Lemnitzer to Gladio. But is there any indication that any of these disparate pieces on the chessboard played an operational role in the events of 11/22/63? Well, spoiler, for those of you who are waiting on the edge of your seat, I am not going to solve, signed, sealed, delivered, finished, the JFK assassination in this presentation. Sorry to get your hopes up. But here's what we do know. We can at the very least trace what has been said about the whereabouts and operational capacities of the various players involved in these plots on the day of November 22nd, 1963. For example, speaking of Operation Mongoose and Ed Lansdale, where was good old Eddie on the day of November 22nd, 1963? Well, there are people who have something to say about that. For example, Colonel Fletcher Prouty, Mr. X, of course. His assertion about the three hobos infamous pictures, well, his assertion was that the hobos were distraction and unimportant in and of themselves. What the real money part of that money shot was the man passing them in the opposite direction, the man that he identified, at any rate, as Edward Lansdale.
So when researchers had arrived at that point, one of them came to me one day and said, look, of all the pictures we've studied, this little episode of these men being marched right across in front of the school book depository building where Oswald was supposed to have been, and across the street by Dealey Plaza where the president's car had just gone, into the sheriff's office. There's something wrong about these pictures. So we looked at them very carefully. And in the very first picture, in addition to the two policemen and the three tramps, as they're called, is another man. And he's walking in the other direction. But the thing about it is, so that his back is more or less or his side and his back is more or less to the photographer rather than face forward. But there's something about it is, how is it possible that anyone at Dealey Plaza that day, and here these men are probably being marched across there 5 minutes after the president was killed. Everybody was running around. People were excited. Sirens were blowing. And here's this man in a business suit just as casually walking along. He doesn't even turn. He's not looking at anybody, just walking past, and he happens to be standing by these men as they're being marched. The least he would be doing is looking at the prisoners or looking at the policemen. You know, anybody would, especially at that time. This man's looking at nobody. And I recognized immediately that that man is General Lansdale. Now, Lansdale is a very interesting figure in the Kennedy era. And I know Lansdale. I worked with him off and on from about 1952 to 1963. So he retired. Now, this is interesting. He retired from the Air Force on October 31st, 1963. Well, Of course, the picture could have been 100 other people, and I could be wrong, but I know him very well.
Well, who can argue with Mr. X, right? About General Y? Well, at any rate, yeah, the Easter egg for people who haven't seen JFK, if you look carefully at the nameplate of the general who orders Mr. X to the South Pole, it's Major General E.D.G. Something Dale or something like that. Anyway, it's Lansdale. And there have been various versions of this proffered by Prouty over the years. I will leave you with his testimony to the ARRB on the matter if you want to delve into this even further and his identification. And you could continue exploring that particular photographic rabbit hole and scrying the tea leaves and taking the Rorschach inkblot test of, I think I see the glasses of Lansdale in that photograph and other such speculations that I've read online. Anyway, is that definitive proof? Hardly, but potentially it might be Lansdale. Anyway, it might be something for further exploration. Speaking of which, well, how about some of the other people that are involved in this swirl of military madness? Well, how about LeMay? Our good old friend Curtis LeMay. Was he involved in this somehow? Well, of course, there's a whole rabbit hole with regards to the whereabouts of General Curtis LeMay on November 22nd, 1963. You could, for example, go to jfkfacts.org for their post on where was General Curtis LeMay on November 22nd, 1963, which talks about his various movements and what we do and don't know about those movements on that day, but also, of course, cites Navy Petty Officer Paul K. O'Connor, a hospital corpsman whose job it was to assist the pathologists at the autopsy, recounted consistently over the years that when he was ordered by the chief pathologist at JFK's autopsy to tell whoever was smoking in the morgue to put out their cigar, he walked over to the gallery and discovered that the offender was Air Force Chief of Staff Curtis LeMay. LeMay contemptuously blew cigar smoke in O'Connor's face and, of course, refused to extinguish his cigar. Anyway, as I say, there's a lot more to pursue with regards to that story, but there is at least some evidence that has been pointed to that LeMay was indeed there at the autopsy and helping to cover up whatever was covered up with regards to that. There's, for example, General Walker. Let's not forget General Walker, who I know was featured in a discussion just, I believe, earlier today at the JFK Lancer Conference. I am here virtually. I'm not in attendance, so as I'm recording these words, I have no idea what is discussed about General Walker, but I will just point people, for example, to the Dick Russell introduction / forward to the H.P. Albarelli Jr. book, Coup in Dallas, talking about the 1963 datebook of Jean-Pierre Lafitte, in which Russell notes that datebook includes the name of Walker, who appears more than once, initially concerning the shooting attempt on his life that Oswald was later accused of. April 7, Walker, Leon Pictures, planned soon? Can he do it? Won't. It's possible that the word is wait. The indication is someone was setting up Oswald to do this, but he didn't want to. The shot was fired at Walker on April 10. Later references indicate that General Walker was in fact aware of, if not in on, the plot to kill JFK. So there's more to explore in that regard. And, well, how about Lemnitzer, since we're talking about the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff committing a 7 days in November type operation, or at least the possibility of such a thing. I don't think there is any serious JFK researcher out there who attempts to pin the blame or even really deeply implicate Lyman Lemnitzer in particular in the events of Dealey Plaza in 1963, if for no other reason than Lemnitzer has a pretty good alibi being halfway across the planet at the time. But I don't know about serious JFK researchers, but anyway, speaking of Cottrell's NATO's Dagger at the Heart of Europe book on Gladio, he does say something about this. He says, quote, "Of all the juries that have probed the deaths of John and Robert Kennedy, official and informal, none have expressly pointed the finger of suspicion at General Lemnitzer. Yet if one man had the motive and desire to see the brothers off the scene, commencing with the president, then it was a soldier in the grip of hatred so powerful that any lengths were acceptable. Northwoods and its offshoots demonstrated that he regarded morality and the defense of American interests as a distraction. Here was a man who would enlist mafia hoodlums in the service of his objectives. He cheerfully waved volunteers off to certain death in the Bay of Pigs fiasco. He planned to unleash terror on innocent Americans going about their everyday business so that he could get his way over Cuba. He contemplated extinction of a quarter of the human race, and very possibly life itself, with magnanimity. He hired Nazi war criminals with equanimity. He was not alone in that, but gave every impression of complete disinterest in their crimes against humanity, which he brushed off like dandruff. Anyway, I'm sure you could have your definitely quibbles with various things that are assigned to Lemnitzer in that paragraph and some of the conclusions therein. But at any rate, that is what Cottrell writes on the subject. So, long story short, the connections between these various plots, overt and covert, and what happened in Dealey Plaza is a seriously understudied subject. Obviously, every bit of this is extremely well studied, but the combination of these particular elements and how specifically these players come together, there aren't as many books on that subject specifically. So I will point people in the direction of one of the few analysis articles of this that I am aware of, that comes from the Kennedys and King website, which published Rob Couteau's analysis, NATO's Secret Armies, Operations Gladio and JFK, which concludes, from all this, we may conclude that Gladio, far from being a local phenomenon strictly anchored within its respective host nations, was in reality a fluid network with complex international appendages. As mentioned earlier, this nexus extended even to Latin America. Whether such poisonous strands reached into Dallas in 1963 through figures like Yves Guérin-Serac, with his sick dream of a planetary dimension of state-sponsored terror, remains a question, and the implications of his OAS colleague, Jean Suetre, shadowing the movements of JFK on that fateful day, are intriguing. So, there is, I think, much more research to be done on these different threads and some of the players involved in this, and specifically how something that I think has not really been talked about a lot with regards to Kennedy, specifically Gladio, and some of those tentacles and Perm Index and all of that, how that ties into this. So, I guess what I'm saying is, this presentation is really just the beginning of the broaching of this subject. It is certainly not the definitive conclusion, but generally speaking, it's time to roll up our sleeves and do the collective work on this. I will point people in the direction at the end here of just a very, very select bibliography of some books that I think are helpful in starting and spurring this research. For example, I've cited David Talbot's Brothers many times already in this presentation, and that's no coincidence. I know it is not a new book, but I have recently read it for the first time myself, and found it to be extremely enlightening with regards to the overall painting of the picture of the internal struggle that the Kennedys brothers were facing in the JFK administration, with regards to the Cuban operations with the military, the intelligence agencies. It paints a very, very vivid picture of the impending threat from within and all of those various pieces of the puzzle. So I think it is worth your time and attention if you haven't read it. With regards to Gladio in particular, again, of course, I will commend Ganser's work to your attention. NATO's Secret Armies, Operation Gladio, and Terrorism in Western Europe. And for what it's worth, I will put Richard Cottrell's Gladio, NATO's Secret Dagger at the Heart of Europe NATO's Dagger at the Heart of Europe on this list with an asterisk. It is a kind of phantasmagoric book of strangely put together, with sometimes within a period of a few paragraphs, transitioning continents, transitioning time frames of decades. There's no serious footnoting here. There's just a few notes in the back and a couple of notes scattered throughout the book. Some of the details and easily verifiable facts are flat out wrong, like saying 7 Days in May was published in 1961, and then saying in a footnote 1962, etc., etc. So I certainly cannot recommend this as, do not take everything in here as some sort of Bible truth. But there is enough information in here that is intriguing that at the very least could be cookie crumbs for real researchers to follow up on. I will again point people to what I just mentioned there, Rob Couteau's, as I see, one of the few short form analyses of this subject in particular, NATO's secret armies, Operation Gladio, and JFK. And I, of course, will exhort you, if you haven't seen it or read it yet, to watch and or read 7 Days in May. And I will beg to differ with JFK or one of his aides or whoever was caught on that particular presidential tape talking about the awful amateurish dialogue in the book. No, I disagree. And as an Anglo-Irish master from Trinity College, Dublin, I have the professional credentials to say it isn't awful amateurish dialogue. Sure, it's not exactly realistic, but it's snappy in that kind of Pulp Fiction-y kind of way that I find entertaining at any rate. And it is, at the very least, a very, 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 very interesting book to have been released in 1962. And there's just one more thing about 7 Days in May that I keep forgetting. What was the name of the president in that story?
I know you think I'm a weak sister, General. But when it comes to my oath of office, defending the Constitution of the United States...
Nobody has to teach me how to salute a flag.
Somebody has to teach you about the democratic processes that flag represents.
But don't you presume to take on that job, Mr. President. Because frankly, you're not qualified. Your course of action in the past year has bordered on criminal negligence. This treaty with the Russians is a violation of any concept of security. You're not a weak sister, Mr. President. You're a criminally weak sister. And if you want to talk about your oath of office, I'm here to tell you face to face, President Lyman, that you violated that oath when you stripped this country of its muscles, when you deliberately played upon the fear and fatigue of the people and told them they could remove that fear by the stroke of a pen. And then when this nation rejected you, lost its faith in you, and began militantly to oppose you, you violated that oath by simply not resigning from office and turning this country over to someone who could represent the people of the United States.
And that would be General James Mattoon Scott, wouldn't it? I don't know whether to laugh at that kind of megalomania or simply cry.
James Mattoon Scott, as you put it, hasn't the slightest interest in his own glorification. But he does have an abiding concern about the survival of this country.
Then, by God, run for office. You have such a fervent, passionate, evangelical affection for your country. Why in the name of God don't you have any faith in the system of government you're so hell-bent to protect? You say I've duped the people, General. I built them. I've misled them. I've stripped them naked and made them defenseless. You accuse me of having lost their faith, deliberately and criminally shut my ears to the national voice.
I do.
Well, where the hell have you heard that voice, General? In freight elevators? In dark alleys? In secret places in the dead of night? How did that voice seep into a locked room full of conspirators? That's not where you hear the voice of the people, General, not in this republic. You want to defend the United States of America, then defend it with the tools it supplies you with, its Constitution. You ask for a mandate, General, from a ballot box. You don't steal it after midnight, when the country has its back turned.
Are you serious, Mr. President? Are you honest to God serious? Well, I could walk out of here tonight and offer myself as candidate for the office of presidency. And by tomorrow morning, I'd be sitting at that desk with precisely the mandate you hold so dear. And what's more, Mr. President, you know it, and I know it, and this country knows it. So don't tell me I'd have seized an office tomorrow without the benefit of support. If you really had the guts to call for a show of hands, you'd be on an airplane right now back to Ohio.
You can ask for and get your show of hands, General. Just wait a year and 9 months for something called election.
A year and 9 months from now, I don't think there'll be an electorate, let alone an election. I think we'll be sitting on our own rubble. A minimum of 100 million dead. And on the gravestone we can carve, they died for Jordan Lyman's concept of peace.
Oh, that's right. Lyman. President Jordan Lyman. Coincidence, surely. It's a very common name. Anyway, I think we will leave this exploration here today. As I say, this is just the beginning, not the end of this particular line of research, but I trust that the researchers in the JFK Lancer crowd will have at least some cookie crumbs to follow if they are so interested. And if you are interested, I would exhort you to check out the hyperlinked transcript of this presentation at corbettreport.com/JFK Gladio. As I say, if you're watching this presentation live at the Lancer conference, it will not be up yet. It will be up in the coming days. If you are watching this from my website, then obviously it is up on the website. But there will be a hyperlinked transcript with every word that I have said and a link to every document, every movie, every video, every article that I've cited, every book as well. So it will all be up there on the website. I hope you'll make use of that resource. I am James Corbett of CorbettReport.com. Thank you for your time and attention, and thank you to the JFK Lancer Conference for allowing me to make this presentation today.
There's been abroad in this land in recent months a whisper that we have somehow lost our greatness, that we do not have the strength to win without war, the struggles for liberty throughout the world. This is slander, because our country is strong, strong enough to be a peacemaker. It is proud, proud enough to be patient. The whisperers and the detractors, the violent men are wrong. We will remain strong and proud, peaceful and patient. And we will see a day when on this earth, all men will walk out of the long tunnels of tyranny into the bright sunshine of freedom.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was the President of the United States.
Woof woof.